Crow? 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 Hey, Crow. The second Lightlark, book? It's out. Again. Okay. Crow?
Here we go again. Lightlark. It's Lightlark, a viral TikTok book with very little substance. Like, look, I don't think I have to give much backstory here, and if you ever need like 4 to 7 hours of explanation on what Lightlark is, I can totally suggest a few videos. Lightlark, though, is not really worth obsessing over, even as a hater. And this is why I legitimately really do not obsess over it. Rather, it has emerged in my life like a malevolent specter, coming back a year later to terrorize me for a fitful week before I can again rest. I did not set out originally to write a 4-hour review of a bad book last time, I just had 23,000 words to say about it. And here, a year later, with its fame mostly forgotten, I, for one, welcome the ghast of Lightlark 2 back inside my body for the sake of entertainment. And 25,000 words this time. After all, I've read a lot of people's comments on the matter over the last year. A lot of people seem very hopeful that TikTok popular kid Alex Aster will have improved and taken the critique her book received to heart. A lot of people seem to think the first book was just like that because it was a pet project she'd had since she was a teen, and that writing another might force her to have original thoughts. So I'm here for all you people and for all the mischievous freaks who enjoy learning about trash fires they never actually have to read. I read NIGHTBANE, and get this, you won't believe it, but it was exactly as bad as Lightlark. Let's see how long it takes me this time. Lightlark, as a concept, has a wonderful ability to be about as expertly weaved as spaghetti. For a book which is often extremely simple and a world mostly borrowed off of fantasy cliches and very blatantly Sarah J. Maas's work, it is extremely difficult to discuss Lightlark's world. The timeline of tangled curses, lies, headache-inducing, just concepts, it just causes problems the moment you try to question any of it. A lot of the time, I've had to scratch my head and simply go, why? And the answer to why things function as they do, well, at this point, it legitimately is a lot like understanding the main plotline to Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, it's entirely dependent on assuming certain story aspects which are only hinted at in text, which makes me the game theory. So I expect a cameo in the Lightlark movie is what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. Lightlark's world and lore, especially as of NIGHTBANE, Book 2, is very back to front. One of the only ways to understand the puzzle pieces is to realize the character and premise came first, and the lore to justify it came later. NIGHTBANE adds a few bits of lore, all of which feel crucially missing from Book 1. The biggest hint it was a late addition rather than planned from the start. To help make sense of the plot, I'm going to cover the world and rules up front, including some major NIGHTBANE spoilers, because just trust me, this is the best way to do it. So, Lightlark. It is an island. We even have a map this book, which we didn't, so I had to draw my own map, and I think my own map is still really beautiful, but yeah, we have a canon map now. It's an island where once 6 realms lived together in peace. The sunlings, the moonlings, the starlings, the wildlings, the skylings, and the night shades. Each kind of person has access to a specific magic based on their magic ethnicity, I guess, and people only can access one realm's kind of magic even if they have inter-realm parents. These magical abilities are deeply unbalanced, still, with the skylings controlling breezes and flying, while wildlings can earthbend, control plants, grow a tree in an instant, seduce anyone, create gems, and make ultra-healing potions. And they also get special animal familiars. The list of what nightshades can do is worse, from just alter memories to gaze through mirrors to create black holes to pretty much anything at all, it's not really a fair system, and it highly favors where the main characters wind up. The Six Nations are ruled by the Sunling King, who is also called an Origin. The Origin, as part of the original founding bloodline of Lightlark the Island, can use powers of all the realms as long as there's a significant population density who live on Lightlark. I'm trying to just explain this plainly and already running into one of the many undefined mysteries, like there'll be a lot of those. Look, the Origins can't use the power of a wildling if there's only like one wildling on the island, but he can use starling powers because there's like 200. So somewhere in there is the ideal population density that gives Origins powers of the people who live there. One day, 500 years ago, some drama occurred and a starling named Aurora or Celeste accidentally unleashed a curse on all the realms and Lightlark itself. These curses were deeply unbalanced and lame, but caused a lot of friction. People blamed the curse magic having nightshades, who had already left the island, and so they were exiled for good. Same with the wildlings, who were made to have to consume human hearts to live. In general, the curses made all the realms dislike each other and flee the eternally stormy land Lightlark had become and settle new lands on surrounding islands. Every 100 years, the storm around Lightlark would clear, and the realms would send their rulers to have a centennial summit. This was basically a meeting to try and track an obtuse prophecy, which was inexplicably framed as like a deadly game. It was not deadly, nor was it a game. Now, the rulers of Lightlark are special people. A ruler is the most powerful of their magical ethnicity. They're capable of easy and extreme magic far beyond normal levels. They're also immortal unless killed, or unless they have a child. This is because ruler power is in some way a finite resource, keeping one person alive forever, but aging when split between children and descendants. Ruler power is sort of also connected to the people. If a ruler dies without an heir to continue the bloodline, all people in their kingdom will also die. This has never happened, but everyone knows it to be true. In NIGHTBANE, we get some answers about why these rules are the way they are. It turns out the original founder of Lightlark worked with a nightshade to weave a powerful secret curse called Nexus, which is a pretty poor name for a curse, by the way. The Nexus curse is why people die if their ruler dies, binding the people's lives to their sovereign so they can never rebel. This twist on, like, divine right of kings is actually a cool one, so it's a shame this lore is about one paragraph long in the book and never comes up again after its very late introduction. Still, we know the Nexus curse is also why people can only have one power even if they have dual heritage, and why an Origin, as the bloodline of the first king, is exempt from the multiple power thing. There isn't an easy, transition for this, but next up on the lore table, we have love bonds. They're officially called that now, though I think, we didn't have a technical term before, but they've always been a concept. In this world, if you love somebody, they're able to access your powers, even using those powers against you or stealing them from you permanently. We have very little information on the regular use and abuse of this feature, as we only see it from the very unique POV of the lead. And it's another interesting but squandered concept. Do people sense their love bonds? Only sometimes. Can anybody in love do this? Probably, but maybe not. Do people steal powers all the time? Apparently never, despite that being the plan of our lead in the first book. And is it only romantic love? Interestingly, I have a quote on that. Our first quote of many. And we're going to get, this is the thing, I pronounced the lead character's name wrong the entire time on my first read and review. It is not Isla, it is not Isla, it is Isla. And I got that wrong the entire time. I felt like in canon the book kind of laid out that it was Isla, but it's Isla. And if I make a mistake again, which I am very liable to do, I apologize. I just really can't get it out of my head how I keep thinking it's pronounced. So, Isla. Isla shook her head. I don't understand. I can feel it. You love me. Why won't you touch me? She had tried to touch him multiple times. She tried to kiss him, to get close to him, to make clear what she wanted. Every time he had rejected her. The realization came at last like a sword hilt to the temple. Are you not attracted to me? He said nothing, and she suddenly felt ridiculous. Of course he could love her without wanting her in that way. Various shades of love existed. She was so stupid, so foolish for just assuming. Page 129. Isla here is being a true asexual ally, but this sort of backwards justification, almost directly in response to people asking, but is it inclusive, is not as helpful as it seems. Various shades of love exist. Great. But wait, is a love bond actually something that can be platonic or familiar? The answer is, well, no. If platonic love was enough to create a power-sharing love bond, the climax of the first book no longer functions. Okay, the climax of the first book. It revolved around the villain ensuring via love bonds that the lead would have access to all 6 realms' power at once so she could harvest it for herself. The villain was pretending to be the lead's best friend for most of the book with a loving, sisterly, platonic bond. If this power stuff was transient over friendships, Aurora/Celeste would have had access to all of the realms' power without needing to physically harvest it with the bond maker. Probably. I had to revisit Lightlark to write this review, and guys, it is really, really a mess. It is really difficult to sort through these things, especially because lore begins to contradict itself, but we'll get into that way later on. Beyond, though, the use of, this one specific mention of platonic love in the first book, this situation, if love bonds and power sharing were a common facet of life like friendship is, we just see it more than this one mention, realistically. People have, usually, more than one friend, and they usually love those friends just as fiercely as a romantic partner. Now imagine having a great group chat that also makes you all into extremely powerful magic users who can borrow each other's abilities at will. We could restructure society around these uber friendship polycules. Basically though, my point is that Isla bringing up shades of love is a useless bit of inclusion where there's no visible evidence of the case. All we ever see or hear of love bonds is through Isla's horny heterosexual ass. She's accepting of the notion that Oro might be asexual, which, 3 cheers for that. But god damn it, he better be allo-romantic. Oh, and don't worry, he is interested in sex, as the quote just continues on. I'll just include it. Oro had her pressed against the wall before she could say another word. He was looming over her, eyes filled with a burning intensity that made heat pool everywhere. Isla, he said, attracted does not begin to describe what I feel for you. Page 129. And admittedly, it's probably for the best that they didn't make the losing love interest asexual. Not the best rep there. So, going back to our Lightlark Primer timeline stroll, we get to the first book's events. I'm able to luckily skip explaining most of it, as much of it is just never mentioned in NIGHTBANE. Our lead is Isla, though, the wildling ruler whose name I always pronounce accurately. She's about 20 years old and has no powers, a secret which has made her mentors squirrel her away from the public eye as much as possible. Her life is secretly very arranged. Her father was a Nightshade general, and her mother was the wildling queen. Aurora, the villain, had her parents killed so Isla could be raised according to the villain's evil plan, to attend the 5th centennial under instructions to seduce Oro, the king of Lightlark. Aurora would then harvest all 6 realms' power from Isla for a goal which quite literally was never made clear. It seems like it's just revenge over being cheated on once 500 years ago, and she's just kept that flame burning even though everybody involved is dead. Isla, however, a year before the centennial, gained access to a magical artifact which she calls her Star Stick. We, again, are never given a description of what the Star Stick looks like. Continue to imagine $30 princess wand. This allows her to teleport randomly around the world. She's not very good at it. She meets Grim, or Grimshaw, the current Nightshade ruler, and they begin an enemies-to-lovers relationship before the plot of the first book. Grim, also lied to by Aurora, is aware of Isla's plan to seduce Oro and that Oro can sense lies, so he forcibly removes all of Isla's memories of their relationship right before the centennial begins. Why can Oro sense lies? Well, that's because there's something called flares, which are uncommon abilities passed rarely through family lines, in addition to the fact most people manifest their magic uniquely anyways. There's such a thing as just powers that skip a generation, and also flares, which are powers that skip a generation, but I guess they skip more generations. Oro can sense lies, Grimm can teleport, and Isla winds up being immune to curses. Grimm then seduces Isla all over again while lying to her, a deeply creepy move, and she genuinely forms feelings for Oro, ending the book by dissing Grimm and picking Oro. He warns her that when she recalls her past, she'll return to him, Grimm that is. The book ends with Isla realizing her crown is the key to a secret door and just opening the door, and it just ends on a cliffhanger. But okay, wait. While we're still in this set-up primer, there's actually more stuff to cover. For one, Lightlark is not a world only inhabited by humans. There's magic beings everywhere, usually unhelpfully referred to as creatures or ancient creatures. There's just constantly, he was attacked by the creature. He was found by the creature. There are creatures in the woods. It really drives me crazy that pretty much never are they named, they're just called creatures. These ancient creatures include mermaids, specters, giant snakes, shapeshifters, blue-winged freaks, dragons, and more. In many ways, Lightlark wants to be a high fantasy with whimsy and expansive systems beyond just people with magic. But the ancient creatures all feel like scattered random encounters who have decided that being cryptic and unhelpful is their only joy in life, even though they are fully sentient and could probably just tell people answers to these questions. The ancient creatures hint at coming from elsewhere, of being older than Lightlark, and NIGHTBANE expands that with its biggest wasted lore addition yet. Towards the very end, it turns out that Lightlark itself is a pocket world formed by people thousands of years ago from a much bigger plane. Why they left and what the original world was like is not yet known, but it's certainly an interesting direction. As usual, the book introduces it and then no one comments or wonders about the implications, moving past the lore drop until next book when Aster has actually thought of some answers. Now, this is a section that I have had to edit a number of times as I go, but that's basically it. That's the primer. Now you know your Lightlark basics. Let me walk you through the plot of the second book. The first thing that you need to know about NIGHTBANE is that it immediately denies you the cliffhanger Lightlark ended on, and only returns to what is behind that damn door on page 361 of about 400. The second thing you need to know about NIGHTBANE is that while not divided into parts, it really ought to be. Much like the book before, the plot is extremely scattershot, introducing ideas or subplots that are resolved either within a paragraph 200 years later, or just never at all. It's constantly throwing in time skips or addressing things off-page. Concepts are introduced, like, is Isla a good ruler, and then they're only resolved by the narrative skipping over her action and dialogue to tell us she did good ruler things. There's almost no effort at cohesion of any kind, and the plot itself is as loose a framework as, a NaNoWriMo pantser would come together with. To talk about it succinctly, what am I gonna do, make this 10 hours? I need to rearrange the order of some of these events away from what the book literally presents, so bunch the storylines together, arrange it a little bit differently. If you're to compare this to a book, some of the things will happen out of order, but it's a mammoth job which really should have been the editor's task, not mine, but I promise you it's the best way to dive into this. At the end of last book, Isla and Oro realized they were in love, and both seemed mutely surprised by this. Here's a quote. The fact he could access her abilities meant she loved him, though she didn't even know what that love was. She had loved her guardians, she had loved Celeste, she had, at some point, loved Grimm. Page 4. And Isla very much has a point here, and a right to wonder. I wonder how love bonds work too, girl. Love is a very complex idea, so how is she supposed to reckon with it in a world where it can be so tangible? She's also just stressed at the start of the book. Grimm's reveal of their past, forgotten relationship, and his weird grooming continues to bother her, as does pretty much everything. While she and Oro attempt to open the MacGuffin door, shadow power blasts her back, and she has this vision of Grimm surrounded by blackened corpses, which she takes as prophetic. While prophecy exists in this world, and there's even an oracle frozen in a block of ice like right nearby, it's not touched on why everybody accepts that the magically locked Isla was gifted with a random prophetic vision. And it turns out, by the way, that it's not a vision of the future, but a memory. That's a very late twist. While she fears this vision of Grimm she thinks is in the future and tries to understand her relationship with Oro, Isla feels overwhelmed of her duties to the two realms she wound up in charge of and her place in the world. She's going through her very own depression arc. And while it's not written carelessly in regards to mental health, it's also a very specific angle of it. The very aspirational trauma-conquering style that Sarah J. Maas is extremely fond of, where Isla is able to simply stop being depressed thanks to a hot boy and also just, deciding not to be. Oro and Isla hold a meeting of the rulers and their representatives to discuss the newly uncursed world and the future of the island of Lightlark. After the events of last book, though, that really only means Isla, Oro, and Azul. Grimm is now a distant enemy, and the moonling Cleo is too mysteriously bitchy to attend, but she does send, some random guy. A new starling is introduced, Marin, who serves as the starling representative. Isla, remember, is the ruler of Starling after stealing Aurora's ruling powers last book. NIGHTBANE, as a whole, enjoys a council meeting. Or, I suppose enjoys isn't the right term. It has council meetings, a lot of them, but mostly out of an obligation to pretend it has any political depths. The representatives discuss news like the facts skylings are flying with hang gliders and there's a rebellion happening, but it's all extremely surface level. At one point, though, the Moonling representative quizzes Isla on her realm. In this following quote: "After the curses, Isla had injected power into her lands to save her people while she recovered. Late at night, with her portaling device, she had visited them in secret. Wildlings have begun shifting their primary food source." She saw clear disgust on Soren's face, which she had guessed had to do with the fact her people had previously subsisted on human hearts. "My people have already started harvesting their own crops, but we still will need to achieve an assortment of diet and agriculture now that they're dependent on farming. How many of you are left?" Soren interrupted. She frowned. "I'm not sure. As you know—" "You're not sure?" Soren asked, eyebrow raised. She could feel her face grow hot. It was a reasonable question. The kind a good ruler would know the answer to. "Do most of your people know how to wield power?" "I don't know." "How is housing? What has the rate of reproduction been in the last century?" "I will have to find out," she said through her teeth. "Do you—" "Enough," Oro said. Page 19 to 20. The storyline of Isla's qualifications to rule is an interesting one. It's one I'm for, but it's also extremely clear it's surface deep, like everything. Soren here is both asking fair enough questions, but is also being needlessly pedantic. I suppose part of me thinks this is a response to people trying to be meticulous picking apart her world building, like working out how many hearts the wildlings would need to live, the author feeling the need to address that ruling a kingdom is a complex thing, but that asking a bunch of questions is just irritating. But goddammit, is it really so rude to expect a consistent world capable of functioning outside what the plot demands? No, it doesn't really matter the housing of the wildlings or their reproductive rates, but it does matter that they apparently need help to learn how to farm. They have plant magic, which, on Isla's extreme scale of power, can grow a tree from a seed to hundreds of years old in an instant. A powerful wildling should be capable of growing a pumpkin, and a low magic wildling probably has a green thumb. The fact that they don't know farming or agriculture also confirms, apparently, that wildlings used to dine exclusively on human hearts. They have no knowledge of harvesting crops and require help to vary their diets, suggesting they also haven't been hunting food. I guess this whole time they've only been eating hearts? I don't expect Isla to necessarily have all the answers, but it's clear the author is the one who simply doesn't know these things and doesn't care. Also at the meeting, the new Starling representative Marin brings up a key world-building fact which has, until now, never come up. Slavery. For centuries, we have been an afterthought, a blip in your ancient lives. We have been treated as disposable by many, taken in the middle of the night, subjected to labor and torture, and sometimes worse. She looked at the king. You executed those found guilty, but so many fell through the cracks. She grimaced. Star Isle is in ruins. I can't imagine the new land is faring much better. She looked to Isla. We need a ruler. Page 20. This is a ludicrous introduction. As poorly defined as Lightlark's world building has always been, the idea that all of last book there was a severe issue of everybody raiding starlings to take as slaves, and it never came up, is impossible. Isla's best friend was Celeste/Aurora, the starling ruler, and Isla star-sticked her way all around the new lands. Yet hearing this now, she mostly doesn't react or seem to care as usual, but she certainly wasn't aware of it. There's even the fact that Marin thanks Oro for dealing with slavers in the last few weeks like they were ever an established issue. And I will continue to call it slavery, though the book never does. Like, literally, what other term is there for people being abducted and exploited like that? The book will continue on with the issue pretty much one other time near the end, and never resolves or addresses it at all. An unspecified group of people for hundreds of years took starlings as slaves. I don't even want to know how impossibly that breaks the math on their population, by the way, and no one talks about it. It's the same as the rebellion plotline brought up here in this first meeting, which basically is a meeting of plot hooks. They just go through and name a couple things that will come up later, and that's it. So the rebellion. There is something else. Rebellion on the island is brewing. Our spies have heard whispers carried along the wind. Oro frowned. What do these whispers say? The people are not pleased with how long it took to break the curses, or our decisions as rulers. Page 18. People are unhappy. Are they doing anything? Are there riots, protests, angry letters? What do people want? What decisions do they disapprove of? We will never learn. This is a plotline about rebellion in only an obligatory way, just as apparently introducing slavery into the world is just an obligation. It will come up about 2 more times and then have no significant impact on anything in the story. This is the depth of pretty much everything in Aster's writing, but these 2 examples come right after each other and illustrate it very well. After being chewed out by the others, Isla is upset she isn't fit to rule and doesn't know how, so she speaks with Azul. Our unproblematic king tells her that ruling is hard and a ruler must serve their people. He also suggests that her people may put pressure on her to have an heir soon, even though in this world that is a process which would immediately begin to kill her. She decides to be officially coronated as the ruler of the Starlings with a ceremony, and, well, let's just move to another quote. I'm gonna have so many quotes. It's just so often saying it is badly written isn't enough. I need to share these words with you, the people. But first, before her coronation, she heads to the Wildling Newlands to meet her people. This is what that looks like. She told them everything else. That she believed she'd been born without powers. That she had a device that allowed her to portal at will. That she now had starling power. Page 31. As much as recapping known information can be tedious in a book, it also can be a good character building moment. How Isla feels saying these secrets out loud, if people in the audience react, if there's any questions, or even how she phrases it. But it's all skipped over. This happens a lot in NIGHTBANE in order to make room for more grim fan service later. The Isla learning to rule plotline is one that could be interesting, but just as the Isla is depressed and Isla doesn't know what love is plotlines all could be interesting and good directions for the book to pursue. All of them will be cut extremely short. When Isla comes to her island to ask her people if they need anything, they literally go, "No, we're good, go do other stuff." It's really convenient that Isla can, this way, get points of being a good leader without ever having to solve or address any problems directly. The coronation scene is where the plot begins, kind of. As Oro crowns her as the official ruler of the Starlings, a rift opens up nearby Lightlark Castle, and a bunch of lizard demons fly out of it and attack. Isla can't use her powers to defend herself, but does briefly make some sort of connection, like a moment of recognition, with one of these lizard creatures called the Drek. They then disperse. When the rulers gather to discuss the attack, Cleo calls them, again, Dreks, and everybody agrees it was probably Grimm's doing. Not long after, Grimm attacks at another party and makes his plot-defining statement known. "Consider this a warning," it said. His voice in this case, "a glimpse at the future. You have 1 month to vacate the island. In 30 days, I am coming to destroy it." Shouts, screams, nothing will be left. You can choose to flee to your new lands, or join me in a new future. The choice is simple. Fighting is futile. The ruin coming is inevitable. Page 144. And by the way, when I said that it was pretty much shortly after, you might notice that the coronation is page 30 and this is page 144. There's really absolutely nothing there's so many things that happen between those 2 points, but also absolutely nothing. It's insane that the plot kind of is introduced at page 30, but we only get Grimm coming and announcing his attack page 144. There's just this weird dead air for so long. Anyways, Grimm announcing his attack on Lightlark in a month is what prompts Isla to begin her training, and she visits a blue ancient creature from last book, who's instantly able to unlock her powers of Wildling and Nightshade. This sends her into Flashback Corner, a section I'll separate and talk out later as a whole. The next 350 pages of the book are often interrupted by long flashback chapters of Isla and Grimm's relationship in chronological order, sometimes having some relevance to whatever is happening in the present. I'll circle again back later, but that's just going to be going on from this point on. Isla manages her training relatively easily while also dealing with her and Oro's relationship issues. And Oro is, technically, a character. He's okay. Much of his role in the first half of the story is to counter Isla's depression arc, reaffirm her feelings, and then be utterly shafted by Grimm later. As much as I'd like to like Oro in theory, it's just impossible to get over the looming knowledge he isn't long for the world. He has more scenes, they even have a bit of, pleasant teasing of the notion that he could be an appealing romantic lead, yet it's impossible to ignore the book's obsession with Grimm and his endgame status. Even while Isla and... It's gonna happen every time, guys. Even while Isla and Oro culminate their romantic arc in the first half, she's having sexy dreams about Grimm the whole time. It's just unfair. But just because I like them in theory, it's true this is still NIGHTBANE, and Oro's romance still feels very paint by numbers. Imagine your OTP... And that's what wrote this book. It's the imagine your OTP. It's these POV TikTok, put your character in the situation. Both Oro and Grimm, at multiple times in this book, do the, who did this to you? Did somebody hurt you? They both are doing the exact tropes and cliches, because that's just what romance is to this book. It's these tropes and cliches. Here is a scene of them together. She pressed her lips against another smile. Do I encompass any other favorites? Am I your favorite liar? Favorite incapable ruler? Her tone soon became bitter, because, in truth, she couldn't imagine being anyone's favorite anything. Your favorite weakling who can't go a few hours without retching? Oro turned to her then. He looked her right in the eyes as he said, Isla, you are my favorite everything. Isla's then insecure for a bit, ... She nodded, and it didn't do anything to make her head feel better. Before he could respond, she added, Do you wish I wasn't everything I am? No, Isla, he said finally. It's the parts you don't seem to like about yourself that I love the most. Page 66 to 67. Aww. What did he mean by this? This is superficially cute dialogue reassuring Isla's low self-esteem at the time, but it feels cobbled together from something else. I had to cut down some sections for being succinct, but when Oro refers to the parts Isla doesn't like, he is either referring to her being a weak, incompetent ruling liar, or something entirely unstated. It's just too easy to fill in the gaps and understand the romantic meaning of I like what you hate about yourself, but Isla hasn't actually listed the sort of traits that justify that line. This isn't about her talking too much or being really blunt. She's expressed insecurity, and Oro has rebounded to tell her everything she's worried about is something he loves, not that it isn't something she should worry about at all. It suggests something NIGHTBANE in general struggles with, which is a commitment to tropes and cliches at the expense of actually having these tropes make sense. It'd be very easy to tweak their conversation to make Oro's line make sense, but it doesn't actually in canon. It only sounds nice. Most things in NIGHTBANE function off this exact same principle. This is an idea seen somewhere else, inserted crudely in, and it kinda sounds nice on first glance. Oro here exists to prop Isla up, train her, tell her to love herself so she can get over anxieties. I don't hate some of the words here on her mental health, but it all feels very hollow and obligatory, never fleshed out into much of a theme, especially since she pretty quickly gets over it with Oro. I don't want to rule. I don't want my life tied with thousands of others. I don't want to have all this responsibility. She shook her head. And I know that makes me selfish and awful, and I have no right to be upset, but I am. I want a life, Oro. Worse than all that is, I don't deserve any of this power. I am no one. You are not no one, he said steadily. You are Isla Crown, and you are the most powerful person in all the realms. Page 90. Oro then continues with a very long monologue that I've had to slightly trim. Love, you seem under some delusion you're anything less than extraordinary. Who did this to you? Your guardians? Did they make you feel like nothing would ever be good enough? Or was it him? Grim. The woods heated with his anger. Tell me, Isla, did someone else break the curses? Am I mistaken? Damn the vault. Damn the powers. You had nothing and you broke the curses. You are the key. You see that, don't you? We were broken before you came. With you, we were saved. You are not a poison, Isla, he said, his voice filled with intensity. You were the cure. And he continues. I wish you could see yourself the way I do. You would never doubt yourself again. Isla closed her eyes. What if she tried to believe him? What if she put the negative thoughts to rest once and for all? Page 92. Oro's page-long monologue on the greatness of Isla is heartwarming stuff. You can understand the desire for this narrative. It's nice to think of someone looking at abuse, really, and giving you a long lecture about how wonderful you are. Who hurt you? Indeed, I understand the want for that. But we're talking more in broad narratives for a book here, not a POV imagine. This is the turning point on Isla having depression and trauma. She simply stops. There isn't actually a correct answer to writing mental health journeys, only very wrong answers. For a lot of people, it is a loved one they are able to cling to while getting back on their feet, and positive thinking may be a factor. Someone out there has definitely been able to think, I'm just gonna stop having bad thoughts, and pulled it off. I won't deny that. But this resolution to the plot line, with that out of the way, isn't great. Mental health issues don't generally cease no matter how hard you will them to, and her acceptance of her flaws coming from a hot boy rather than soul-searching isn't great either. Isla, at the same time, is training and attempting to do her job as ruler, but her catharsis here is just around the fact that her boyfriend thinks she's perfect. It doesn't feel like an honest portrayal of character growth when it is narrated so explicitly by the romantic lead. Did she accept herself, really, or does she just accept everyone around her telling her she's the most special girl ever? Is Oro really listening to her with this? Or is he just saying she's perfect and that's enough? At this point, I've covered most of the core of the first book, half of the book, while skipping a very large amount of side plots. You'll probably notice my page numbers being really out of order. NIGHTBANE is extremely out of order. So, I've been playing a lot of a video game called Pathfinder Kingmaker lately. In it, you run a kingdom while also being an adventuring party. You often have a deadline for the main plot while you're juggling side quests of characters and exploring new locations for resources that will help you progress. NIGHTBANE is exactly like Pathfinder Kingmaker. Don't quote me on that. There's the rebellion subplot. They abduct Isla early on, communicate nothing, and she escapes. There's her helping the Starlings. It is said she arranges supplies, and that's it. There's her and Wildling arranging some nebulous help. Like, I must stop yet again to put another quote. By the time the volunteers had left, the Wildlings had their homes fixed, a steady food supply, new skills, and resources. Isla decided to stay for a couple of days to spend time with her people. She got to know each of the wildlings in the village and ventured to other settlements close by. Ren took Isla into the forest and taught her a few wildlings' wielding techniques, including stances, arm movements, and uses of ability. They spoke for hours. Page 95. It's just such lazy writing. Anyways, she side quests. She's there in Starling meeting Marin and her cousin Cinder, who has strong powers. She gets a special animal to ride into battle. She hears about special ore that can harm the Drex. She talks to ancient creatures on if they'll help fight Grimm at the end of the month, and she orders more healing elixirs made by magical flowers that the wildlings are perpetually running out of and then perpetually finding more conveniently. She's assigned a set of twin bodyguards and meets Oro's circle of friends. She talks to Cleo. All of this feels so abrupt. The chapters often begin in media res and end in media res, that is to say, in the middle of things, if you don't know the term. Often a character will end the scene by dramatically flying, teleporting, or getting swept to sea mid-conversation. The topic being discussed then won't appear for several chapters, or maybe almost the entire book later. And stuff like this makes it really difficult to know where to start. First, links. The book has lazy chapter titles, which is a pet peeve, where the chapter titles simply refer to something said within the chapter or a general concept present. It's nothing artsy ever. So when the chapter titled Links rolled up, I rolled my eyes. This is the chapter where Isla learns that she should have a bonded animal companion, as all wildlings apparently do, and so she goes on a swamp quest to spiritually connect with her cool animal friend. A bunch of weird freaks show up, like a wolf made of plants, or a spider with 10-foot legs, and a bear with horns, but Isla's winds up being a 10-foot tall cat. A cat named Lynx, who is not a lynx. Lynx is a black leopard, also known as a panther, though the book doesn't call him that, presumably to avoid the aesthetic clash of Isla's mentor also having a bonded panther. It's very strange that they treat panthers and black leopards like separate animals. They're really not. Now, all girls want is a giant panther to ride into battle. So Lynx is cool, and that's pretty sick. I mean, from that point of view, great job. I love Lynx. He was once her mother, so we can blame at least Isla's mother for the naming. Isla doesn't do that. Lynx does not do much or get much focus. It just kind of feels like an obligatory cool thing for her to have. Later, Lynx gets armor fitted, which gave me the throwaway line, which I think personally damaged me the most. You might be able to guess why, with the fact that I own a stuffed panther. I really like panthers. So here's the quote. It even had small holes for his pointed ears and a place for her to sit. Page 292. Panthers? Panthers do not have pointed ears. Panthers don't have pointed ears. They have rounded ears. You could find a tip to their ears. This guy is a plush. He has quite rounded ears. His name is Panther. I've had him since I was 5. But in no way would you describe them as pointed. Is it really that difficult of an ask for an author to look at an image of an animal before you attempt to describe it? Next thing of note, the rebellion plotline. I've already said it goes nowhere and isn't fleshed out, but I'd be entirely remiss if I didn't note they specifically wear beige because of the whole people only wear clothes of their realm thing. So I've dubbed them thus the Khaki Rebellion, and they are all my favorite characters. Then there's also the matter of new characters. There's a joke made about the oddness of Oro having friends, but he sure does. They fill out later council meetings, but they never feel distinct. The most notable is Enya, a lesbian firebender who has a convenient love for micromanaging complex economic and political matters, so Isla doesn't have to. Enya is first mentioned like this. It's again one of my favorite sentences. Enya, Ern, and Helios joined me, he said, page 18. Which isn't notable at all, except for the fact that I find those three names extremely funny juxtaposed. My three beautiful, well-named children whose naming conventions are all logically consistent. The singer Enya, a burial vessel, and the Greek god of the sun. These guys all belong together, that's for sure. The next set of new characters are Seal, I don't know, he doesn't matter. Seal and Avel, the Skyling twin bodyguards. Twin bodyguards sure are just a very oddly popular trope, huh? Like, this is hardly the first time. The Grisha trilogy did that. These two do absolutely nothing, let alone speak with personality. Often they fly above Isla wherever she is, and that's it. At the very end of the book, one of them dies, and I'm genuinely unsure if even Aster thinks a reader should care about this, or would care. The next friends are introduced together, so I will copy that. They are both extremely tall men, a moonling and a skyling. Calder is buff but kind, I think, and Zed is basically Sonic the Hedgehog down to his blue hair. Neither of them commands any attention or prominence as the story unfolds. What we do have when we combine Oro's friends, however, is a sort of friend group. It certainly is an effort at one to, make this book feel less empty. When they were first introduced, I had hope for this obvious, Court of Thorns of Roses Inner Circle ripoff, down to the fact there's two hot male BFFs and a lesbian troubled badass, but the book didn't share any of my hopes. They are simply not used, so that grim, sexy flashback fest continue to dominate the page count. But we'll get there later. The last notable character isn't part of Oro's friends, but does show up in council meetings. The starling, Marin. She's basically running the show of Starling, especially as we only see Isla deal with the Starling issues once or twice. Marin has a bit more depth to her backstory and history, especially with the whole slavery inclusion to the lore lexicon. She has a very talented child cousin she's had to shelter, and she wants nothing more than to ensure the future of her people. She turns out to be the leader of the Khaki Rebellion later on. Marin still isn't, and you can say this one with me, I bet, really a character. She functions in the world and fills in a bit more than Calder or Avel, but she has no chance to feel more human than plot function. It's obvious at any given time in NIGHTBANE that the book is desperate to move on to the next grim scene. You might think Marin being Khaki leader might introduce some conflict, such as the fact that the rebellion is unhappy with the system of rulers, but it doesn't. Marin looks to Isla and her curse-breaking abilities as a sign of hope, and Ella, Isla's starling maid from last book, whose job now is unfortunate implications, similarly just praises Isla. This is Ella speaking, she doesn't matter. All of us starlings grew up accepting that our lives would be short and likely miserable. Few of us had any dreams, or goals, or hope. You gave us a chance to live. To most of us, you are a god, a savior. Page 109. Which, I'm not gonna put it on here because frankly the slavery plotline isn't more, developed enough to really throw the shot, but there is something to Isla being made savior of an oppressed group that she doesn't belong to, where they now view her as a god hero. There's something there that we might want to think twice about. I'll talk about, though, the Khaki Rebellion and their actual goal later on, and why it depends on Isla. What matters now is that Marin similarly thinks of Isla as her hope, so the whole rebellion threat is just entirely removed. It's literally a miscommunication, really. And also, with that quote, there's the use of the word God, and to address that, no, we have no answers or hints of any sort of religious system in this world still. The evil, horrible, cursed abbey with its 4 symbol-having windows is included on the world map, but it's never mentioned in this book. Next on the sidetrack, Cleo. In Lightlark, she just fit the character type of mean girl, not actually contributing much to the plot in the end, but just like a constant mild hindrance. In NIGHTBANE, Cleo barely features at all, and when she does, she drops this doozy of a lore point. I heard you were locked in a glass box of a room. Is that true? Cleo asked. Where was she going with that? How did she even know? Isla nodded warily and watched as Cleo turned back towards the moon. She stared at it as she said, You are just a young fool, but you remind me so much of him. Isla could have imagined it, but Cleo's voice cracked with emotion, splitting from its normal coolness. My son. Page 151. Cleo explains she had a secret son who she kept locked up constantly, and who still died to the Moonling curse somehow. I covered the old Moonling curse before, how the ocean just managed to kill people even on land, I guess. But it was never really specified how the moon did that, and this is the same. I guess it'd be morbid for Cleo to discuss how her son died in an ocean curse locked room mystery. But also, how did he die? Did the ocean unlock his bedroom door and then beat him to death? Cleo now has motivation she formerly lacked, and though it's confusing, I mean, she has one. She skipped last centennial because of her son, and we later learn she believes in the other world, the first world, everyone in Lightlark came from. She believes that the dead will live again, including her son. She vaguely talks about helping Isla, but ultimately joins Grimm's side on going to destroy Lightlark for her son. It also really reframes Cleo. No longer is she a generic mean girl jealous of Isla. Now she's apparently a grieving MILF bitching at a child who reminds her of her dead son? Huh. Still, in our side quest Eternity, there's another prophecy in this book. I have very little to say about the subject. An oracle unfreezes herself to tell Isla her memories are the key, and that when the oracle is about to die, she'll tell Isla more prophetic things. Neither of these prophecies are as confusing and drawn out as the Centennial one, instead being more vague statements than poetic predictions. In truth, it'd be really easy to continue with side quests like this. The book mostly is that, and dividing into part 1 and part 2 is something I'm doing arbitrarily and not how the book is arranged, because the book is arranged badly. At this point though, we'll pretend there's a structure, and we'll pretend we're at part 2, where I'll discuss Grimm and the climax, well, mainly, Grimm. The flashbacks begin in this book about 50 pages in and continue the whole way through, with chapters all titled Before, sometimes even occurring twice in a row. Isla constantly ends her present chapters by falling unconscious or suddenly remembering a flashback, and in total there are about 22 flashback chapters. They tend to be longer than other chapters, which are sometimes only like a page and a half, and they are where NIGHTBANE's true passions lie. The flashbacks tell the story of Grimm and Isla's romance in chronological order and with few time skips over their activities. We see the majority of events that define their entire relationship up to the exact point he wipes all of her memories before book 1. When people wanted Lightlark, they wanted these flashbacks. It is pure cliche, it's a standardized enemies to lovers paint by numbers with every other trope the author fancied just thrown in. Nothing in it feels new. It feels like fan fiction. They bicker, they get into sexually charged situations, they tend to each other's wounds, rinse and repeat nonstop. I'm sure that the few fans the series has just devoured these chapters. I think they're rereading this book now, but they're only reading these chapters 100%. From the perspective of a reader, not a fan, these chapters are meant to teach us about Isla, teach us about Grimm, help us understand why he is so devoted to her, and why she apparently once was devoted to him. We are meant to see Isla in a different light by the end. Most importantly, we're meant to love Grimm more. While the flashbacks begin when Oro and Isla are still in their romantic arc, she very rarely discusses them with him or anybody, or even herself. The flashbacks get more frequent as the book goes on, especially after Oro has ended his romantic arc with Isla. They basically say they love each other, he fingers her once, and then they barely interact romantically again. At no point when reading Isla and Grimm's scenes together can you doubt that they are endgame. It begins like the selection. Isla portals in, and she says portal device much more than Starstick this book, especially in the first half, to the Nightshade Palace. She is swept into another room and given red lipstick and a sexy dress. She's put in a group of other girls, despite looking extremely out of place, as we know that the realm identities determine how people look. They really are kind of like magical ethnic groups. Like, people have certain hair colors and physical traits that are skyling or wildling. Isla must look really out of place, but they just assume she's here for the selection thing. So she's put in a group of girls who are all like, ooh, I hope he chooses me. And Grimm instantly sees her, chooses her. He has just a full boner for her. He takes her to his room and starts to kiss her. And it turns out this is his not harem, and he's trying to conceive an heir right before the centennial, I guess. But he's not allowed to sleep with the same woman more than once. He assumes she's there to be, like, bred, and she suddenly freaks out and stabs him. What a meet cute. It's strange how something as wacky as selected to be impregnated by the evil king but stabbing him, teehee, feels very cliche to me. The scenario might be slightly different, but this is the same sort of put lead girl in a sexually vulnerable position so the male lead can want her, then show she's not like other girls with violence, writing that I'm so used to at this point. The flashbacks will come back to that basic formula a lot, by the way. Grimm arrives in Isla's room after she leaves to chew her out for stabbing him, and then he chokes and throws her around until she gets a dagger to his throat and orders him out. He shows a particular interest in her star stick and its portaling abilities, as it turns out he was the original creator of it. He never corrects her on its name, but he does sneer when she refers to it as her star stick. We still also, this item is so important in the book, especially in NIGHTBANE. She's teleporting everywhere all the time, both in the flashbacks and especially in the present. No description of it, no idea how big it is, nothing on it. We don't get its proper name, even though Grimm makes fun of it in what feels like a reference to the fact everybody who read Lightlark made fun of it. Nothing. Isla then returns to the Nightshade Palace and his bedroom in order to offer him a wildling healing elixir, as he allowed her to keep the star stick and now feels in his debt. When she hears multiple people approach the bedroom, she hides in his ensuite giant waterfall bathtub, a circumstance that of course leads to him discovering her when he's naked and about to bathe. He also has giant hands. While I'm here, he has extremely big yaoi hands. In general, Grimm and every other man in this world is gigantic, seemingly an unaddressed extreme sexual dimorphism. Like, last book we didn't hear so much about how tall and big the love interests are, but this book it is non-stop. And personally, I really blame the author of the Love Hypothesis, you know that series? She has a really huge thing for size differences, and I think Aster just read that and just went with it. Anyways, look at this. He was frowning down at the vial, which looked laughably small in his hand, page 119. He took her hand. His hands were freezing. Enormous. Page 121. She tries to remove any ill will between them, and he's a jerk, so she challenges him to a duel. She's fairly well matched against his 500 years of warlord experience, and tricks him into some quicksand, which he sinks into, still swinging his giant sword around. He then throws her in the sand and leaves dramatically. In the present, Isla realizes Grimm must have on purpose let her win at the centennial last book, a revelation surely unrelated to the fact readers made fun of Isla being able to beat him last book. Next, we see Isla visit a Nightshade marketplace in search of skin gloves that were minorly important in Lightlark. While there, we get a sense of Nightshade culture and society. Women wear clothes she had never seen in other realms' land, boots that reached their thighs, dresses with chainmail woven through, pants that were glossy and shimmering. Compared to them, Isla was wearing far too much clothing. Page 161. Rather than sneak around what will really soon be clear in this section, The vision of Nightshade here is both an uninspiring den of edgy dark sin, and also just like one-to-one the Night Court from A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I do not like Sarah J. Maas. I do not like A Court of Thorns and Roses, but the inspiration and borrowing is extremely obvious in both Lightlark and NIGHTBANE. And with Nightshade, Aster's made her imitation even more blatant, down to the badass, sexy leather pants women get to wear. Someone at the market is selling a potion called NIGHTBANE, our title drop, which is entirely meaningless at this point, but don't worry, you will understand the meaning later. Isla tours the wacky street of spooky sellers until she is harassed by a man and runs away. She's intercepted and saved by Grimm, of course. Grimm arrests her and taunts her a bit before offering her a deal. If she helps him find a sword he refuses to give her any details on, he won't kill her, and he'll help her vaguely at the Centennial. We don't need to go into the fact that helping at the Centennial is exactly the same as not helping at the Centennial, because the Centennial isn't actually the Hunger Games, it's just the 100-day brainstorming session. But whatever. We have our obligatory connection despite the fact they both seem to still hate each other. Oh, and Isla is, yet again, as she pretty much is every single time they meet, wearing a very thin nightgown so that Grimm can just mock and ogle her at the same time. Grimm takes Isla to visit the Blacksmith, an ancient creature who lives on an isolated island atop a bunch of sharp rocks that you have to hand climb, who goes feral at the smell of blood. The whole sequence here is extremely odd and out of place, even for a book which has a fair bit of magical creatures in it, and nonsense like sequiturs. Isla obviously cuts her hand, and the blacksmith chases her like just the weird giant ghoul man he is, while Grimm properly just fucks off to leave her. He saves her again at the last minute, and he reveals he orchestrated her getting hurt and hunted because he was curious to test her. He interviews the blacksmith, who says the sword Grimm is hunting was stolen a long time ago. Grimm then removes the blacksmith's memories and they depart. The whole episode progressed or explained surprisingly little for introducing a giant inhuman bonesmith ghoul man who makes magic weapons. For something that is one timeline in chronological order, Grimm's flashbacks still feel a lot like side quests that make up the rest of NIGHTBANE. Off-page, Grimm figures out the next step and conveniently portals Isla wherever they need to go. There's no sense of accomplishment, and certainly until the point he needs a non-Nightshade to pick up the cursed sword, Isla is entirely a side aspect to his plans. She has no use until the exact moment of getting the sword, but is for some reason always there. On their next outing, Grimm reveals he has a necklace which makes him immune to all curses. Wait, huh? I'm fairly certain during the course of Lightlark, Grimm never went outside in the night, so this isn't like solving a mistake. It's just the decision to give Grimm even more overpowered abilities. He has a magic necklace of curse immunity. This book, we learn magic objects are made by people by infusing their abilities into specific items at a cost of some of your life essence. You're basically giving some of your own abilities into an object permanently, but it shortens your lifespan. So a curse-immune friend of his made it for him. Grimm's curse-immune necklace will not be important or mentioned for the rest of the book. The pair head to a sort of Skyrim dungeon of a generic thief hangout, where Grimm goes to murder the top floor while Isla kills the bottom. One thief suddenly comes out of nowhere. Uh-oh, Isla is entirely overpowered and threatened with rape. This one she gets out of herself by jumping out of a window and landing on the man, and so the book is officially feminist. Grimm has kept one of the thieves alive and begins to torture him by cutting off limbs until he agrees to speak. Grimm then kills him anyways. In between their adventures, Isla decides to venture out to Wildling. She's immediately overpowered and captured by some wildlings who nearly saw out her heart until she's able to use her star stick and flee to Grimm's place. He fetches her a healing elixir and gives her hot chocolate while she heals up. He discusses NIGHTBANE with her, revealing it is an addictive drug that gives euphoria while slowly killing. I got extremely nervous here for that classic fantasy drug abuse arc, which is my absolutely beloved thing. Do you remember Hush Hush and the addictive evil devil monster energy plotline? Yeah, I really hate these sorts of plots, but at least it's not that, this book. Grimm then starts to talk about how pain is good for you, and some more sirens went off in my head. There's a lot of sirens in my head, really, when I'm reading this book. Here we go. Here's a lovely quote. Grimm looked down. It seemed to surprise them both when he said, "When I was 7, my training consisted of being cut and skinned until there was barely any flesh on my back." Isla's jaw went slack. Her training could be painful, but to do that to a child? That is barbaric. He lifted a shoulder. It was custom here for a very long time, meant to toughen the body and mind at the height of its growth. The place I trained as a warrior, we were punished for the smallest of infractions. In public, shadows can turn into the sharpest, thinnest blades. That's humiliating. It wasn't. It was a chance to prove we didn't react to the pain. Standing there, being cut and not moving a muscle in your face, it was seen as strength. His eyes weren't on her when he said, "My father would come and watch. It was an honor to show him I had no reaction to the pain." Page 222. First, Isla scoffing at child abuse, like she literally wasn't breaking her arms hanging from tree branches at age 12, like, okay, girl. But yes, Grimm trauma dumping. Is it okay if I say I'm extremely tired of this? This is the case for every brooding villain type like Grimm. It's a convenient backstory where they're the victim to such an extreme degree it feels rude to not give them some slack. No one is saying, oh, you must forgive Grimm because he's been abused and he doesn't know love. But we all understand that is the broader use of this narrative, right? I dislike clowning too hard on abuse narratives, but this level of literally being skinned alive at 7 in public to impress your dad is ludicrous. This is the sort of backstory you write when you're 12, and this is the sort of backstory we've been seeing time and time again for abusive bad boys like Grimm. It's not original, it's not compelling, and we all know what it's doing here. He comes unexpectedly to her room that night to refresh her bandages and flirt. Their dynamic is extremely typical enemies to lovers bickering with sexual undertones, like, you know the sort. He trains her, and they bicker flirt some more. Then he takes her to a party in Nightshade, and he gives her a dress and mask. Does everybody wear this? It was black and gave wildling clothing competition for impropriety. It hung by 2 thin straps that looked one wrong move away from snapping, had the lowest cut bodice she'd ever seen, and a slit so high there was very little fabric in the middle holding it all together. Grimm didn't meet her eyes. Most people do choose to wear little clothing, yes. At least at celebrations like this. Some people just wear paint. He stared at her then, an eyebrow raised. Would you prefer I get a pot of ink and a brush? Page 245. Ah, the classic forced to dress extremely sexy by the love interest. Wait, why is this a classic of YA again? It's hard not to bring up something from A Court of Thorns and Roses again, and I wish I didn't have to. In that series, there is a very infamous scene where the lead character is made to dress in a tiny slip of a dress and decorated with body paint for an evening while the bad boy shadowy love interest hangs out. In that one, feminist pioneer and most beloved book husband Rhysand Nightcourt drugs the lead for her own good, so she won't remember the sexual harassment she is subjected to by others and him. Real plot point. Real bad. So, NIGHTBANE, I guess, is improving one detail of the content it is blatantly ripping off. Like, sure, Isla was made to help him at first by risk of death, and she didn't pick this ill-fitting exposing dress, and she will mostly wind up doing a sexy dance in it of her own volition, mostly, but at least he doesn't drug her. Because the bar is astonishingly low. Isla is a virgin whose first kiss was Grimm in their first meeting, so it's not that surprising she may be shy about her body. She was also raised mostly in the Palace of Wildling. Still, there is something off about her having a cultural shock to nudity, since many wildlings are explicitly said to wear little to no clothing. It mostly feels like Isla's shock at nudity here is to make her more flustered for Grimm, rather than paying any mind to her actual cultural heritage. Nudity is not innately sexual, so she probably would have been taught, to just be used to it. It's not innately sexual, and in the naturalist, semi-nudist colony that she's in charge of, She probably saw a lot of it whenever she was allowed to go out. Anyways, Grimm and her are at this party looking for a guy who might have stolen the sword from the people who stole the sword. We're doing this again. He has a giant snake with him at all times for inexplicable reasons. The thief is watching a sexy dance show at a tent, and Grimm prompts Isla to join in and seduce the thief. Reading the next scene, let's just all agree it's nice she isn't drugged. Like, at least it's not a Court of Thorns and Roses. Grimm looked from the dancers to Isla, then back again. She scoffed. Absolutely not, you cursed demon! He shrugged a shoulder. Then we'll find another way. I just thought, you being a temptress and all, you could use your powers, since I'm unable to use mine. Powers. She was supposed to be a cursed heart-eater, able to tempt a person with a single look, capable of bringing anyone to their knees with her seduction. Somehow, he hadn't seemed to notice her powerlessness, beyond a few pointed statements. He couldn't find out she didn't have ability. Would he rescind his offer to help her during the centennial? Roaring began to fill her ears. They hadn't even found the skin gloves. She and Celeste needed him. Her people needed him. They needed her. They were suffering. Can't you just torture the information out of him? She asked. Suddenly, the option sounded a lot more appealing. Grimm looked amused. Of course I can, Heart-Eater, but one of the most infamous thieves, one of the only people who knows about the sword, turning up dead in a violent fashion? It would be suspicious. He shrugged a shoulder. I suppose, if you're unable to actually use your powers. Page 248. So, quick facts. Grimm knows she doesn't actually have any powers. Grimm nearly kills the thief anyways. Grimm is the ruler and can do whatever he wants, so he doesn't care about causing a suspicious death. Grimm is potentially already working with Aurora/Celeste at this point. Grimm is just negging her into doing a sexy dance for him. Isla is able to be alone with the thief, drug him, and learn the next stage of the quest for the sword after doing some sexy dancing. Grimm is furious when he walks in and sees Isla on the unconscious thief's lap because he's that possessive of a girl he's only ever been a dick to. He pins her against the wall, says a lame line. You're not something I want to love. You're something I want to ruin. And shoves her through a portal. Isla returns to the night market randomly to hunt for Grimm. She's immediately attacked and overpowered by a gang of Nightshade criminals. Grimm then shows up to save her. He does the "who did this to you" bit, but before she can even answer, he snaps all of the assailants' necks at the same time with his power and carries Isla away. She got wounded, so he puts her on his lap to tend to her wounds while calling her an idiot. All typical stuff. She writhes in pain atop his lap, and it is implied that he gets a boner. Cool. They head finally to where the sword is, finally. Though there's still much of this left. We are not done with this flashback section at all. It turns out that the sword is in a cave guarded by an actual dragon, and a dozen magic traps. Who set this all up? I don't know. The sword itself, very weird. It seems to teleport knowingly somehow. The sword is supposed to be trapped so that nobody with Nightshade power can use it, but Isla has Nightshade power, but I guess she's also immune to curse. It doesn't make sense. We also get to hear about the sword itself, which has this really weird design. It was made of 2 pieces of metal, braided together like lovers until they formed a single joined tip. It's page 275. Grimm, when speaking to the blacksmith, called the sword twin blades as well, despite it being one sword. I guess because it is literally 2 swords twisted round each other like caduceus. I found little consensus on what this thing is supposed to look like, but a lot of agreement that it probably isn't very good at being a sword. Isla triggers a trap the moment they first step into this dragon cave, and Grimm, like a brave US Marine, shelters her with his body and takes every arrow. This leads to, right after the other one, another scene where they tend to each other's wounds as she looks after Grimm. He continues to act weird about pain, leading to this. It isn't an ideal. It's truth. Emotion feeds power, and pain is the strongest. Isla frowned. That couldn't be right. It is true, he said, likely sensing her doubt. If it was, have you ever purposefully? Yes, he said quickly. I have purposefully caused myself pain to access deeper levels of power. That was a long time ago. Now it isn't so necessary. As if an afterthought, he said, and there are many different kinds of pain. Page 278. Ah, Grimm's cliché backstory continues to just fill out. I have so little tolerance for the way self-harm is written and treated in fantasy books like this. It isn't Ugly's level of kind of idealizing it by accident, but I'm tired of it coming up at all. Like, why does Isla leap straight to asking Grimm if he's self-harmed? This information will come up later somewhat, the pain is power thing, but Grimm's history of hurting himself won't. It's bringing up a serious topic and making it another bullet point in Grimm's tragic tableau so we can all feel bad for him. Oh, he doesn't even need to hurt himself anymore because pain in his heart is even stronger. I'm so tired of this trope, of authors taking things like drug abuse and self-harm, putting a slight fantasy spin on it, and then not thinking any more about the seriousness of the topics they are still technically writing about. It's not that I think NIGHTBANE needed to turn into a therapy session about severe mental illnesses and its effects. It's more I think NIGHTBANE shouldn't be playing with the subject at all since it isn't mature enough to handle it. It's not like a fun little detail to sprinkle into your work to just make it dark, you know? It's more than that. Anyway, Isla and Grimm continue to tackle the Dragon Cave by throwing Grimm in front of all of the bullets they can. I support this. Our next check-up then has them sharing a bath together. Rather than continue their increasing horniness, they have a weirdly tense medicinal bath where they face different directions, slowly turn around, and then quietly stare at each other. In a better book, there might be something to that quiet acknowledgement of bathing on either end of a giant bathtub as comrades. In this book, it's kind of funny how awkward it is and how suddenly the chapter just ends. Next, we have a ball interruption. At least it isn't another wound-tending scene, and it gives us more of the hilariously edgy Nightshade society. If the word debauchery had been a place, Isla was looking at it. The halls of the castle were filled with music so loud and fast it droned out the moans she could hear only when she passed by the dark halls, people moving furiously in the shadows. Inside the ballroom, all pretense of propriety was abandoned. People danced with long ribbons of black silk on platforms lining the room between suits of armor. In the darkest corners of the rooms, couples were coupling, not seeming to care in the slightest that they had hundreds of people as their witnesses. Before, Isla had felt embarrassed by the amount of skin she was showing, but now she saw she was wearing almost the most fabric in the room. Her dress was black gossamer, with a dipping neckline, 2 pieces covering her breasts, then coming together in the middle. It had a slit up her hip. Page 296 to 293. With long quotes like this, I generally respond to the overall and do my best to avoid pointing out obvious bad writing. I and plenty of people caught, I'm sure, the earlier repetition of Grimm shrugged his shoulder. It was used twice in the same few paragraphs. Grimm is constantly shrugging one shoulder, nonstop the entire book. NIGHTBANE, like Lightlark, is full of basic bad prose like that. Here, I'm just gonna shoot from the hip on a lot of stuff, like, couples coupling, you say? And she was almost the most dressed? The height of debauchery is the sound of moaning, semi-public sex, and, like, house music. Like, how exciting. I do generally really get a kick out of just how vanilla this version of sexy sin is. This is a YA book, and I am surprised but don't really mind the lack of explicit details. We've sort of just moved towards YA having very explicit sex, and I don't really think that's fully appropriate in truth. But still, for something that's meant to be shocking and perverse, it appears that Nightshade's night court doesn't dream higher than a nightclub with a lack of security. Isla finds Grimm on his throne and sexily taunts him. Every time I add a quote, it is that much extra work for an editor and myself, but also, I need this one for myself. Even from far away, she could see that he was furious. Woman fought for his attention, barely clothed, but he was watching her, eyes blazing with so much anger he looked ready to wage a war. Isla did the most foolish thing in response to his anger, which was smile and blow him a mocking kiss. Immediately, he stood, knocking over some of the goblets that the woman had placed around his throne. He didn't even look down. All he did was take a step forward. 297. I find Grimm's pissy little throne covered in wenches, which he discards with half a dozen goblets of wine, to just be extremely funny. Look at that idiot on his sad, empty chair of horniness with more thoughts than he can handle. Poor baby. Grimm doesn't talk or do anything with Isla, though. He just watches her in anger. She dances and flirts with another man and leaves with him. She's still only ever done anything sexual, at this point still kissing, with Grimm, and is curious to have more experience. She doesn't feel the same instant spark with this other man, but she also isn't, like, unhappy with the experience of kissing him. She's more just feeling it out and experimenting. Then, mid-make-out, the man is stabbed through the chest by Grimm and tossed to the floor. Don't worry, Heart-Eater. He's not dead. I will make sure of it, Grimm said in response to her expression of horror. He leaned down to whisper, very slowly, because I'm gonna bring him to the brink of death 1,000 times before I will finally allow him the mercy of dying. Page 299. Yikes! Isla and Grimm are not together by any means. He has just stabbed and threatened to torture a man just because Isla allowed him to touch her. This is extremely controlling, frightening behavior, which... Oh, wait, actually the guy was evil and Grimm was just saving her life again? So it's fine and not creepy for him to torture and murder a guy for touching her? Oh yeah, of course. Grimm announces that the man Isla was kissing had actually secretly fantasy roofied her, and he just recognized the signs that she was leaving with him. She only starts to feel like the fantasy roofie effect after Grimm has saved her, so from her point of view, it's still a bit of a shock. Random guy trying to be independent and kiss someone who isn't Grimm. Oops, he's goddamn dead, and Grimm is telling her that it is for her own good. But you know, she does feel weird and he does give her an antidote, so clearly the man was a criminal and everything Grimm did was above board and cool. Just so you know, it doesn't really matter if Grimm actually is morally bad. I like villain romance, believe it or not, but I like the kind where they are villains. I understand the appeal of a dark romance, of a scary monster romance. Love interests don't have to pass a morality test to be quality characters. But Grimm isn't someone who does controlling stuff and owns up to it. He's not someone who's simply evil but also has the hots for Isla. Grimm instead controls Isla's life and actions, and he in the narrative will just tell her, like, repeatedly, it's a good thing he was there. For a sad, edgy shadow man, he isn't particularly morally evil, he just sucks. So after saving Isla from rape yet again, he then immediately hits on her while she's still rattled. His eyes seared through her as he looked her slowly up and down. We do such depraved things in my dreams. Isla opened her mouth, closed it. Grimm leaned closer, so they shared breath. When you finally do beg for me to touch you, and you will, you won't want anyone to touch you ever again, Heart-Eater. His voice was a dark whisper against her ear. Late at night, you will think of me touching you. With my hands. My mouth. Isla's chest went tight at his words, his proximity. Her insides puddled. She was hot everywhere. And you will dream of me too. Page 301. There's, I believe, a deliberate effort on the book's part to make Isla an active participant in the romance, which is a good thing. She multiple times is the one to seek Grimm out, after all, and sometimes asks a suggestive question. She is into him. Still, it's impossible to ignore the fact that she is 19 years old and he is over 500. He's not even like a fae, like a different species who lives on another timescale. He is a human like her who has lived as she has just for a very long time. And she is a girl who has been abused and manipulated and kept in a cage her entire life. He even knows that. Not when they first met, but likely by now timeline-wise. Part of the reveals in Lightlark was that he was working with Aurora Celeste himself and entirely aware of how Isla had been abused and raised for a single purpose of seducing Oro for Aurora's plans. Like, he knows about this. He knows who Isla is. He was friends with and the boss of her dad being the man who made Grimm his curse-immune necklace. He knows Isla has no experience and likely can guess by her actions and reactions that she is a virgin. I like age gaps, actually, but not when it gets creepy. And Isla at 20 is older than most YA leads, but it's still worth noting one of the main factors to consider with age gaps in relationships is the power dynamic. She is 20, she can date that hot 500-year-old, but isn't it kind of weird a hot 500-year-old would be interested in a girl who has no life experience and has only ever lived in her childhood bedroom as a prisoner? Grimm and her next meeting is him yet again being gravely injured so she can tend to his wounds. Here he explains the sword, the history of it. So the sword, his ancestor, Cronin, Cronin. His ancestor's name is Cronin. Like, come on. So Cronin the Barbarian had the sword commissioned to turn his soldiers into Drex a few thousand years ago. The sword also allows people to then command the Drex. Grimm is looking for it because Drex have been attacking Nightshade for a few centuries now. They just started showing up. But the sword has been cursed so that if a Nightshade uses their powers near it, the sword would teleport away. Isla's role here is to retrieve the sword so he can't. Though, Keeley, you notice the sword would surely just teleport out of his grasp. It's slightly addressed, but not really. Their conversation moves on to Grimm and the women he sleeps with. He assures her that he hasn't had sex with anyone else since meeting her, and that Nightshade ruler tradition says that he isn't allowed to have sex with the same person twice. It sounds silly, but it is one of the few lore snippets that makes sense, since in this world him falling in love could lead directly to the end of his entire country, thanks to love bond power stealing. Isla calls him lonely, and we get another favorite line. He shrugged a shoulder. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Love is for fools anyways. It makes people do foolish things." He looked at her and said, "I do not intend to become a fool." Page 313. Eloquently said, dumbass. The next time they visit, because there are 22 of these chapters, remember, Grimm takes Isla to a giant field of flowers. With some investigation, she realizes these flowers are the same rare flower which is used to make wildling healing elixirs. As has been said repeatedly by now, Isla thought there was only one small patch of the important flowers, despite the fact wildlings seem capable of harvesting a near infinite amount of elixirs from it. Again, we know wildling power can be used to propagate and age plants instantly. Certainly, Isla's powers can. So the fact there's a magic flower they're perpetually running out of doesn't make much sense. She also realizes she doesn't know the name of the flower, despite it being the most key invention the wildlings have, and deeply important to the plot of both books, and something she explicitly helps develop herself. It turns out, though, that the rare flower is NIGHTBANE. In the Nightshade lands, NIGHTBANE is turned into a euphoric drug. In Wildling, it's turned into a healing potion. They're actually opposites, as the Wildling elixir cures wounds but doesn't numb pain, while the Nightshade elixir numbs pain but doesn't heal wounds. The meaning of the title NIGHTBANE is now clear, and the book does not let you forget it. Both poison and remedy, opposites like her and Grimm, the ruler of life and the ruler of shadows. 318. Isla and Grimm work out a sudden deal where Isla offers to have wildlings make healing potions for Nightshade if Grimm provides the flowers needed and also hearts for her people. Heart logistics have not come up this book particularly, and I like to imagine that mention was put in there just for me. Really though, I'm not going to get into it, especially when we still don't know how often they have to eat hearts, but Grimm sending a few extras really isn't going to tip the extinction scales mathematically. Grimm and Isla once more nearly have sex, and he has to flee. Then immediately next chapter he returns, and they again have the same repetitive lead up to sex. Isla once more is in a thin nightgown, Grimm looking like a demon with wide shoulders and an alluded to hard-on. This time he fingers her, which true sex maniacs out there will realize is the third time Isla has been fingered, and also the third time there's been confirmed sex in this series. It's true, like, it's better than just skipping to penetration, but the sex scenes so far feel exactly the same, and the fact that they are the same act really doesn't help that. Grimm does have penetrative sex afterwards. the sentences I must casually write, but it's far quicker. While this book is far, far hornier than Lightlark, it is remarkably scant on details, treading this odd line of never naming specific acts while making it unmistakable what is going on. So, while at this point we've accumulated their relationship with sex and they have nearly obtained the sword, Isla's and Grimm's fantastic flashback derby isn't done yet. Instead, another interlude. Isla asks Grimm to take her to a festival in Skyling, and he does. It's just romantic fluff serving no other purpose than to give me dark hot air balloon-based memories. There's an unimportant scene in this book where Isla has to wrestle a giant snake, and as it attempts to strangle, eat, and drown her at the same time, that's like a scene, right? And true champions of this channel may know how similar that is to something which happens in Save the Pearls, another book I covered. So if I had 2 nickels for every YA book I've covered with giant snake strangle drowning, I'd have 2 nickels, etc. Except also here we have a lot of hot air balloons, and yet again, the commandment haunts me. If I had a nickel for every bad YA book I've covered with hot air balloon-based romance scenes, I don't want these nickels. The Hot Air Balloon Festival in Skyling is named Launch of Orbs. Not the orbs, just orbs. Launch of Orbs. Launch of Orbs. It's to celebrate the new season of hot air balloons being unveiled. You know how hot air balloon technology is. It's just always constantly improving every season. Just like in the commandment. Grimm takes the chance to do the cliche, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" call to the response of him looking at her and going, "No, true beauty is something else." He literally does the, she's like, "It's so beautiful," and he's like, I know what real beauty is, it's you. He also, at this point, calls her the bane of his existence. Also, which, bane, like NIGHTBANE, do you get it? Like NIGHTBANE. He then steals a hot air balloon and starts going hard and heavy with her in the basket. He then shoves her off the edge of the basket midair, pulling one of the most difficult maneuvers in heavy petting, the falling from a hot air balloon to riding dick pipeline. Grimm pressed her fully against his chest and pushed her over the edge. Before she could scream, the world tilted and she landed on Grimm. He was on her bed. She was straddling him. 1,000 violent words in her throat, but all of them withered and died when she felt him, every inch of him, against her. 344. This is a pretty advanced move to pull in the bedroom. I really wouldn't recommend it. They again raid the Dragon's Cave, but before they can claim the sword, Grimm saves Isla's life with his powers, and the sword teleports away in response. He says that he only wants her now, and they have a far longer sex scene full of dramatic declarations. Grimm makes another subtle comment about Isla. "Heart Eater, you are both curse and cure." 353. Because he's, she's the, she's the bane, she's like the bane of his existence, like NIGHTBANE, do you get it? She's like NIGHTBANE, which is also the title of the book. It's like poison and antidote at the same time. She's like light and dark. She's NIGHTBANE. They have sex all night long, and then Grimm says something really romantic about Isla. Check this out, okay? "Heart Eater," he said, "you are a bane." She remembered his words from before. "You are both curse and cure." Page 354. So, do you get it? Do you get it actually? That she's, Isla's like, she's like the bane of the night. She's like NIGHTBANE. She's a poison, but also like the cure, like night, the bane of the night, like NIGHTBANE. Grimm also then goes on to note that it's never been like that for him before, that having sex with this 20-year-old virgin has been the most incredible sex of his life. Considering how Isla felt about kissing someone who wasn't Grimm, I honestly think we might see a soulmate revelation by book 3. Oh, and Isla finds and delivers Grimm a baby dragon. It's never mentioned again. We jump ahead, again, still in this endless journey. Isla randomly is in the woods one day and feels a vibe, and follows it until she finds the shadow sword just laying in the open. Isla gives it to Grimm, and he again gives some more lore information, explaining that Lightlark is a world in miniature which their ancestors fled from for unexplained reasons. The portal to return is located within Lightlark Island, and Nightshade has always wanted to claim Lightlark in order to gain access to this portal and return to the first world. We do not know again why they would want to, what this place they came from was like. Grimm knows the layout of the countries in the old world. He's like, well, one country was up to the north and cold, one country was to the east. But he clarifies nothing else and seems to know nothing else. Apparently, opening the portal within Lightlark would destroy the island and the entire pocket dimension, it seems. This is the key to the present timeline, which I've put aside for this aside, God, and is Grimm's goal for the plot of NIGHTBANE. He is trying to claim Lightlark to use the portal beneath it, and Cleo is helping him because she for some reason thinks her dead son will come back to life in the old world. But don't worry about Cleo, she's not important. Isla asks if Grimm will use the Drek commanding sword, and he clarifies he no longer wants to. His original plan, the moment he realized she was immune to curses, being the daughter of his old curse-immune buddy, he planned to make her break the curse on the sword and likely die in the process. He changed his mind now. Oh. Isla is rightfully upset he planned to just use her like that and just orders him gone. He returns later anyway, saying more Drex has appeared and maybe now he's gonna go die fighting them. So check out this really crazy thing that he says about her here. I need you to know that you changed everything. He ran his thumb down her cheek. The gods don't listen to people like me, but I would go on my knees and beg them to let me keep you. You were once the bane of my existence, and now you are the center of it. 386. God fuck it. Did you see that? She's the bane of his existence. Like, the bane. Like, okay, whatever. At this point, the most interesting part of that paragraph is more confirmation religion exists. Oh, and also he continues, and it's exactly as you'd imagine. My entire world was night, and you lit a match. No matter what happens to me in this life, I'll find you in the next one. I'll always find you. What I feel for you can never be extinguished. Like the nighttime sky, it is infinite. You and me, we're infinite. 386. See again my theory we're going to some sort of soulmate situation with these lines? Grimm confiscates her star stick, but powerless Isla is able to borrow his teleportation power through his love bond, and goes to be with him. She takes the Drek sword, and on seeing a village beset by Dreks and Grimm nearly die, is able to channel her pain into a wave of endless destruction that destroys everything in the vicinity that isn't Grimm. Isla begins to die, and Grimm teleports her away. We're gonna end the Grimm side quest there. There's one final bit of information, a last ridiculous twist or two, but we'll hop back to the present before revealing it. This is the end of the flashback montage. I hope you enjoyed your ride. The flashbacks are, as I said leading in, what the fans of the series want and wanted. I assume, again, they are losing their minds over them, actually. Grimm says a lot of big, romantic, dramatic things. He performs the tropes we all know and love with the efficiency of a circus seal, and he's the champion of the world at having sex good. These chapters are woven in between the story of NIGHTBANE, but the present always feels second to the past. Flashback chapters are generally longer again. They flow in a linear fashion and stick to one primary plotline. They are better than the main book, and where all the attention really lies. I'm not opposed, again, to the tropes that Grimm represents. Like anything, execution is far more important than concept. I love a shadow boy. Honest, I love an evil shadow boy. I've just not met one in YA that I like. Or most fiction, actually. Something that is much harder to explain to you, though, is how the flashbacks sit within the book itself and how Isla feels about them. I've explained at this point that Isla very rarely reacts to information she learns, usually asking a question or two but not lingering much longer on the topic. While she wakes up from these dream flashbacks and remarks internally about what she's witnessed, it's all very fleeting. Most of it is Isla determining she doesn't recognize the girl in these memories, that she's radically different from the person she was with Grimm. Isla, however, is not. Her personality is even less defined than in Lightlark, but Isla in these flashbacks is entirely in character for herself. She rather has to be. Like, after all All of this stuff happened to her last year before being forcibly forgotten. If Isla had significant character growth from hanging with Grimm, she would have experienced it either ways, just not recalled what prompted the change. It would be interesting if Isla in these memories was different, was at all a personality defined, but she's the same impulsive, impetuous girl we're all familiar with. The flashbacks illustrate and add nothing to our understanding of Isla now, only just the specific details of how her relationship with Grimm went. That's fine, and that's what they're there for, but it's annoying to me to see the book remark on her change when she is so obviously the same. Okay. Part 3. Coming together. Here we are. And the sun is setting outside because it's winter. And I don't have fancy lighting. I don't have fancy anything. I have a cheap light. And nature itself. But if the sun sets on this, isn't that beautiful? Isn't it like life and death? Like cure and poison? Like night and bane? So if the sun sets slightly while I'm in the middle of filming this and the lighting gets really bad, isn't that just what Isla would have wanted? So, we're here. Back to the present, guys. Grimm has declared he's coming to Lightlark in a month, and people can either join him, flee, or die. Oro, Isla, and the Nobody Gang are involved in a bunch of side quests to ready for him. Tracking special ore, recruiting ancient creatures, making an energy barrier from starling power. There's vaguely a khaki rebellion, and Ora and Isa have had sex once and ended their romantic development. The Skylings, who are a democracy, hold a vote on if they want to help defend Lightlark, and they decide against it. Azul is apologetic, but listens to his people. I had a bingo card of predictions for this book, and one randomly generated one I had made for me in my Discord. This one included both Azul and no Azul on the same line, and I counted both as being true. Top tier guy. Love him. Go fly, King. Go fly off being sad, gay, and fabulous. Far away from here. My good man. Ah, what a champ. So, Isla feels torn between Oro and her hot memories of Grimm. She doesn't talk to Oro or anybody else about her conflict, though, so it never amounts to interesting character development. One thing in particular bothering her is the invisible magic necklace she cannot remove. I haven't brought it up yet. It's the potato necklace, infamous for being introduced in Lightlark as being described as having a black diamond the size of a small potato. Grimm gave it to her last book and told her to hold it and think of him, and he'd come instantly to her side. It conveniently can turn invisible, too. This book, it's revealed she can't remove it no matter how hard she tries. And it never comes up on the fact that, say, she's been hanging out and having sex with Oro with a necklace she can't remove, and he's never ever touched her neck and felt the necklace is just invisible. It doesn't disappear entirely. I mean, I guess it's confirmation Oro has just never touched her. He fingered her once, that's it. You know, he never went above the belt there on his touch. Anyways, we'll circle back on the necklace later, but I want to establish it now. Like, I have a lot of things to say about this necklace when its significance is finally revealed. This necklace is more important than you could ever think, and goddamn, I hate it. Isla, around this point, has the memory where Grimm tells her that pain is power, and she begins to hurt herself to boost her power, growing thorn thickets around Lightlark to act as a defense for the coming siege. There is minimal strategic planning in the lead-up to this attack, by the way, beyond Isla basically dropping a bunch of thorn and quicksand pits around the place to deter intruders. That's the depth of our military strategy. Isla keeps repeating, "Power tastes like blood. Power tastes like blood. Power tastes like blood." She just keeps repeating that, as she bleeds from every orifice on her face and cuts herself to grow in power. It's all quite sudden and not a reoccurring thing at all, as Oro comes across her and makes her promise not to overdo it like this again. As developments go, she feels like she needs to be more powerful to save Lightlark, hence turning to this dark source of magic. But mostly it feels like a way to make Isla feel more dark and have a dramatic scene. I've already covered how I feel about the use of self-harm fueling power and how it is being used carelessly in a narrative. We don't need to repeat that, just, you know. There's also this random interlude, which will presumably come up next book, so I have to mention it now. Isla visits Celeste's old room. She's emotional about the betrayal of her friend and expresses her feelings by smashing the place up, specifically starting with orbs Aurora told her contained mysterious things. Now, Aurora/Celeste was a liar, but I probably would take her word that there's things in those orbs if I were you, but Isla just breaks them all. One of them has a feather in it, which she takes with her. The emotions Isla feels here are actually important and interesting. I want them to be addressed, but the scene is randomly in the middle of the book, and the magic mystery orbs contribute nothing yet. Same with this magic mystery feather. The Khaki Rebellion makes their triumphant return and explains the Nexus curse at this point, which I can only assume I explained about a real-time hour or two ago at this point. I'll talk more about the specifics of that curse when I cover the world building and plot holes. Marin, the secret leader, asks Isla to kill Oro to help break the Nexus curse, which binds citizens to their rulers, but she refuses out of love. Marin believes Isla is immune to curses, and so if she became the ruler of Lightlark instead of Oro, her curse immunity would also end the Nexus curse on her subjects. Probably not, but who knows. Isla heads to the Wildling Newlands to check in on her people, and finds they have all disappeared. Grimm has left her a note saying he's brought them to Nightshade, and that everyone is waiting for her. In anger, Isla uses her magic necklace to summon Grimm, and they reunite in the present. Earlier it said Isla sent word for her guardians Poppy and Terra to be banished from Wildling, and it's come up by now no one seemed to enforce the order. It was a really funny thing when it first came up in the book, because it does say Isla has not been to the Wildling Newlands, at all at the start of the book, but it also says that she ordered her guardians to be exiled. Who was enforcing it, if not you, the ruler? She just sent word to somebody somewhere and expected it to be done, and it turns out it wasn't done. In fact, it turns out that Grimm took them in and has been working with them, her abusers. She shook her head, unbelieving, hoping she was wrong. "You have Poppy and Terra," she said, her voice a whisper. "You took them in." Grimm nodded, and her tears fell freely now. The betrayal. "You know what they did to me, what they did to my parents." "It is unforgivable," he said, "but you need them. I don't need anyone." 331. She is rightfully pissed that he's working with the people who killed her parents and raised her singularly to be a sacrifice for Aurora's plan, but Grimm shuts her up with a flirtation and then reminds her he knows better. He says he's no monster, not for saving her people, bringing them to a land with more resources where they wanted to go. He even wiped their memories of heart-consuming guilt because they wanted him to. Isla calls out that he'd mind wipe again after what happened with her, but Grimm rather smugly says it was her people's choice, and they have a right to choose, don't they? Sure, she didn't want to be mind wiped, but these people did, so shut up, Isla, whatever your name is. She calls him out for sending the Drex to attack her coronation, and he corrects her that it was just a random act of Drek violence and had nothing to do with him. She points out the whole "I'm coming to destroy everyone on Lightlark" threat he made, and he again corrects her. "You're coming to murder everyone on the island. You will murder thousands of innocents just to get it. You sent a message of ruin, of destruction." "No, I'm not. I warned everyone here, which is more than they deserve. They can either leave or join us. It is their choice. No one has to die." "Do you really think anyone would give up their home without fighting?" "When fighting is futile, I do." Isla was filled with rage. Hurt. "Heart," he said gently. "If I wanted to take the island by force, I could. Right now. Destroy all of it and everyone in a matter of seconds. The curses are over." 333. He taunts her about the immovable necklace and tells her everything he's doing is for her, and then leaves. And boy, Grimm, boy. This entire conversation is a mess. I'm not opposed to Grimm acting as a villain, obsessed with his own goals instead of morality. But what stirs my pasta about him is that the book constantly reminds us that he's right. He's not a villain, he's the hero. He's doing what is best, and he is correct, and Isla just hasn't forgiven him yet. Isla's people wanted to be kidnapped. Grimm isn't going to war, he's giving a merciful warning because he's unflappably powerful. Isla's anger is repeatedly met by the revelation she is merely ignorant. She's not validated for her feelings, she only has to learn to love Grimm more. He's not a villain who makes mistakes, he's a hero whose version of reality is secretly the only true one, who is making correct choices and knowing if it hurts Isla, like teaming up with her abusers, it's only because he knows best. It's insufferable. After meeting with Grimm, Isla tells the council that she did so and comes up with a plan to steal Grimm's power through their love bond. She didn't believe at the start of the book Grimm loved her anymore, despite everything, but meeting him in person she was able to sense their connection and has realized she could solve the invasion in one easy step by exploiting that. Considering steal the powers of a ruler via love bond was the goal she was raised with her entire life, it's silly it took her this long. The exact methods of stealing powers like this are never clarified. She learns how off-page from an ancient creature, and figures she can block Grimm's powers while he invades and leave him vulnerable to attack, even briefly. At this point, most of the way through, Isla opens the vault. This is that MacGuffin door from the start of the book, the cliffhanger at the end. Last time she tried to open it, she had a vision of Grimm surrounded by dead bodies and shadows, and learned she needed to master her powers to open the door properly. Page 361, and it opens, and inside it is empty. Woo! Before we can even dwell on that, Isla's mentor Poppy shows up inexplicably and suddenly to sword fight her. Isla uses the purest manifestation of power there is and makes a really shitty gem sword. She created another sword, this one crafted out of 1,000 gems. She made them from thin air, her powers hardening into crystal and ruby and diamond. It took so much effort, enough that she felt her powers scrape to the very bottom, getting every last shred. It was her anger, hardened into a blade, glimmering and remembering about to make her guardian pay. 363. Isla loses, and Poppy taunts her with the revelation that the portal to the old world is actually in this empty vault, before just walking away. Isla is in a panic, and she explains this to the council, how opening the portal will destroy Lightlark. They now know what Grimm is coming for, and part of why. It doesn't actually change the war effort particularly, and Isla just scampers off again to go get a prophecy from the unfrozen oracle. Which, hey, wasn't the lore last book that the oracles were frozen into ice by sunling kings and, despised pretty much everybody else? In this book, there's one oracle, and she's just kind of, chilling. She's freezing and unfreezing herself at will, rather than being trapped, to deliver useless prophecies. The oracle tells Isla her fate is divided perfectly in two, and she is destined to kill either Grimm or Oro. Oh damn, how will she choose? The oracle also makes the very clever, very interesting, and very subtle, fascinating comment. You, whose heart has been split in two more ways than one, are capable of both life and death. You are both curse and cure. Page 373. Goddamn. Do you think she's like a bane and a blessing? Or am I just spitballing? Maybe like a poison. But maybe like the antidote? I don't know, lads. It's the morning of the war, a phrase the book uses that makes it sound like a softball game, and Oro is acting like he's just read his obituary. Tell me if you think this behavior is that of a man who is going to live. Isla, Oro said softly. She looked up at him. He traced her lips with the tip of his finger and smiled. Then his face becomes serious. If something happens to me, I want you to leave. I want you to take all my powers and leave. She frowned. Oro, nothing is going to... Love, he said, smiling again. He looked almost happy, almost at peace. He tucked a stray hair and said, It's all for you. He took her hand and kept smiling. All these years, I saved it for you. Page 375. Oro's sudden, moribund acceptance continues, leading to one of my favorite scenes to summarize for friends. I kept calling it the Of Mice and Men style oral sex on the beach scene, which is only slightly an exaggeration. A better description is to imagine this as two soldiers comforting each other in the trenches of World War I, as one is slowly bleeding out. His kiss was desperate, like it might be one of the last things he would ever do. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, One day, I'm gonna take you to my favorite place. She remembered him telling her about it, a beach on Sun Isle with water the green of her eyes. And I'm gonna make it your favorite place too. Isla smiled. She wanted that desperately. She could see it so clearly. Oro pressing her against the sand, waves washing them around them while he wrung pleasure from her, the same way he had in their bedroom. And she could see beyond that too. Tomorrow, she said. We're going to do that not one day, but tomorrow. We're going to win, and everything's going to be fine. Lightlark is going to survive, and we're going to go to the beach. Tomorrow. Oro smiled, nodded, but she knew him now. She could see the tiny signs. He didn't believe her. 376. It'd be pretty incredible if Isla did end this book by going to Oral Sex Beach and shooting Oro with a gun, but it doesn't. I'll do the obvious and point out that they've had weeks of free time and like a month of war planning, so it's really Oro's fault for not taking her to a very nearby beach sooner. We then finally launch into the climax. It's a big fantasy battle, and it's very poorly written. I've read a lot of paranormal romance YA trilogies, you see, so I'm intimately familiar with the obligatory giant fantasy battle, and this is no different. The fight is not engaging, with stakes and imagery just too scant to picture. A bunch of characters throw magic at each other. Nameless baddies and goodies die. The book tries to check in with everybody and their legally mandated paragraph of action, but neither the reader nor the author actually cares about half of it. Like, oh, Calder will regret every violent death he causes because of his peaceful nature? I wish I'd known that ahead of time. Oh no, one of the twin bodyguards died. Tragic. I legitimately right now don't remember which one. The infamous special ore, which has been brought up a couple times, it can harm Drex, which featured a whole chapter side quest to a place literally just named the Forgotten Mines. Yeah, that special ore, there it is. It's used once. Glad we saw that. Oro and Grimm fight as Isla just stands aside and watches. Another classic of any trashy YA series from the 2010s. This fight is delightfully cartoonish, I would say. Oro let his sword disappear and shot up into the air. Grimm followed. He portaled so quickly, it was as if he was also flying, appearing then disappearing in wild spurts. They dueled in the sky, this time with streams of power. Isla watched from below, finding herself cringing at every blow the other landed. She bit the inside of her mouth, the dread churning in her chest. There was no winning. A rumble sounded before the sea spiraled up, becoming a massive snake that lunged at Grimm. In response, he spun a wolf formed of shadows. The creatures battled, mauling each other, protecting their creators. Oro shot out his hand, releasing a dozen throwing blades made from flames. Grimm blocked them with a dark curl of smoke before the shield became a dozen arrows all aimed at Oro's chest. 388 to 389. They anime clash until Grimm pulls the old switcheroo and gets Oro to strike himself with lightning. Isla then grabs Grimm's powers for a moment, and Oro goes to kill him at last, but Grimm suddenly freaks out and tells Oro to stop, because if Grimm dies, Isla dies. I do somewhat miss plot twist corner. This book has too few for me to really have one, but here we go. Twist. The meeting point of the flashbacks and the present. Isla died after saving Grimm in the past with her shadow powers, and Grimm saved her life by linking her life to his. This is not an ability we have ever been told is possible, and the book as typical doesn't care. Oro is aware of life binding, Grimm is. Isla even is, now that she suddenly remembers it, but we never actually have a scene of Grimm explaining what this means, only Isla remembering that he did. It's secondhand information from a first-hand source. You bound her to you, Oro said, voice shaking with anger, with shock. She remembered it now, Grimm's explanation in the past. She knew that binding someone to oneself meant sharing a life, not just powers, but life itself. One could not die without killing the other. That was why, when the arrow had split her heart in two during the centennial, she hadn't died immediately, not just because of the power of the heart of Lightlark, but because Grimm had been keeping her alive. It was only a temporary solution, Oro said, voice shaking with anger, but also fear. Aside right now, why does Oro say that? It sounds like something Grimm is supposed to say, but why does Oro say that? He just says it was only a temporary solution. What? Okay. It was only a temporary solution, Oro said, voice shaking with anger but also fear. Grimm nodded. The other world offers a permanent solution. That was the reason for the war. That was the reason for all this death. She remembered what Cleo had said. In the other world, souls can rise once more. He wanted to open the portal to save her life. 398. You know, of all of the plot holes in Lightlark, I was willing to accept the magic egg heart of Lightlark was why Isla had lived after taking an arrow to the heart. Like, I really didn't need that to be resolved, to also be because of Grimm. Like, aren't there enough things Grimm is doing at this point? With this reveal, well, I don't really have an issue of Grimm binding her life to his to save it in the past, since they were in love. She likely would have consented to it if she hadn't been dying. A lot of other stuff around this is questionable, though, of course. Grimm and Cleo both inexplicably know about the old world, while the ruler of Lightlark himself doesn't, but then they also seem to only know two things about it. It's sealed on Lightlark with a portal of no return that will end the world, and the dead will rise again? Like, is that really enough information to pursue an invasion? This weird hearsay? Grimm wants to bring Isla to the other world so her death can be undone even better, I guess, and so she can be unbound from his life. He's doing this without her asking him to, or without any real need. As long as Grimm lives, she lives. If Grimm was to retire to an island and not invade Lightlark, Isla would be far safer than she is now. Like, just don't get assassinated and chill out, Grimm. She was fine until you started a war based on a rumor. Isla then begs Oro to kill Grimm anyways, but he refuses. Isla pleads about her vision of the future, of Grimm surrounded by shadows and innocent deaths, only to realize that vision was actually just another memory of the past. Just as her vision of her death was, which she has at one point, Isla is remembering the same incident of accessing her Nightshade powers and saving Grimm from Drex. Except the shadows in those memories were all hers, so all those innocent deaths, oh no! Those were her as well. She overdid it back then and lost control of her power, killing a whole village, including children. Isla breaks down at this memory clicking into place and recalls the trauma of the incident. Oro tries to comfort her, but she rejects him, suddenly afraid of herself as a monster that might overdo it again and hurt him. Oro tries to assure her a mistake is not the same thing as being a monster, but Isla is freaking out. Grimm then bellows something. We're basically at the end of the book, so this is the final big twist. Are you ready? She tried to wrestle herself away, but Oro didn't budge. He didn't understand. He didn't know how much of a danger she was to him. Grimm's voice seemed to rumble the world as he said, "Let go of my wife!" There it was. The final missing piece. Page 400. Isla and Grimm have been goddamn married this entire time. Both books. Full-time. Married. Before, I guess, the Christian God in a church? At an altar? Married? God? What was that joke going around about, like, self-proclaimed wife guys again? Grimm is a wife guy. He is I will immediately marry you after tying your soul to mine and experiencing deep trauma because this is what a healthy relationship is. Kind of wife guy. We get very little information on their marriage or even what marriage is in this world. It's certainly unclear why Grimm would ever bring any of this, like, why wouldn't he ever bring this up? Sure, the reveal last book that Isla had ever been in a relationship with Grimm upset her too much for them to exchange more information, but at this point, I think Grimm could have played the "we literally are legally married" card by now. The penultimate chapter of the book turns suddenly to an unexpected direction. The potato necklace. She watched Grimm take a necklace out of his pocket and present it to her, one with the biggest black diamond she had ever seen. "In Nightshade, instead of rings, we give necklaces," he said. "I should have given this to you before. It's a sign of our commitment. Once I put it on, it is on forever. Only with your death will it be released." Page 401. Isla, in the past, asks Grimm to put it on, but he relents and then apologizes as he wipes her memories, bringing us full circle to the start of Book 1. This is a key scene, then, on two fronts. The original context of the mind wipe, which is to say there was literally no discussion, only Grimm's choice, and the necklace being a marriage necklace. A cursed marriage necklace, except it's not cursed because Isla is immune to curses. It's just a necklace with a core function of being impossible to take off. Remember, magic items in this universe require part of the creator's magic, their very soul, to create. Someone is giving years off their life to make shitty immovable necklaces. You better not get a divorce or remarry in Nightshade, or your neck is going to be weighed down by diamonds. The necklace deeply annoys me. For one, Isla is wearing it in the present because Grimm gave it to her. He did not tell her it was a necklace which could never be removed, nor its severe connotations as a marriage necklace. He lied to her about the function and put it on her in the first book. It doesn't matter if she consented in the past. He killed that consent by wiping her memory of it and their entire romantic relationship. And now she's stuck with it. Grimm doesn't appear to have a matching necklace either. Like, I can imagine in book 3 he might, or like a ring, but he doesn't bring it up as like a matching set scenario. So apparently the marriage custom in Nightshade is for men to collar women permanently to mark them. Cool, great. You know, hard to remove necklaces to signify a special relationship is already kind of a thing IRL, but in BDSM it's like actually consensual. This is like a weird, worse fantasy version, because this is not. And again, can never be removed, no matter what. The book is about over here. There is a short final chapter where Isla decides she is a monster and asks Grimm if he'll stop attacking Lightlark if she goes with him. He says yes, and so she does, telling Oro she loves him, but she also loves Grimm. And the book ends. This review does not. You know, I consider the poor lighting at this point to be a tribute, you know. As I've already said, it's a tribute. It's a tribute to the first video. It's a tribute to the sun and our really bad lighting in the living room. It's an artful decision to film as much as I can in one sitting before D&D. But we'll see if I can finish it all. Because, well, we're about 18,000 words in, and that about covers NIGHTBANE. It's now, like, time to move forward through broader stuff, expand on some topics I brought up in the world building in general, especially how the lore evolved and was edited between the two books. I perpetually feel like I'm forgetting something. Lightlark is like that, and the fact there will be a third book that I will next year be seized upon by the same wretched gas that has forced me to read NIGHTBANE terrifies me. But I must be strong. NIGHTBANE is as cobbled together as Lightlark was, but it suffers under the sophomore book curse that comes from most YA series. It wants to add more, but it isn't prepared for more. It is obsessed suitably with the past for a novel where all the best bits happen via flashback. New characters and new lore are fleeting to the monolith of Grimm, perhaps to be addressed next book. Reading NIGHTBANE feels a lot like reading a book hastily written before your eyes. It has the cadence, as I say, of a NaNoWriMo project aided by a bullet point of popular plot holes to address. Certain things are freely clarified and adjusted, but I don't believe for a moment there is a lore bible for this world, and I'm not sure if Aster even looked through her own book before writing the sequel. NIGHTBANE is, ultimately, a scramble. But is it better than Lightlark? And the problem with boiling it all down to that one question is yes, but yes doesn't really cut it. There is more effort in the prose. The first chapter opens with the nicest prose of the book, and there's other nice lines around. There's also the same vaguely scrappy writing that brought us Shiny Cliffy thing. There is some effort at theme of multiple parallels drawn, but they mostly boil down to calling Isla both life and death in 1,000 different ways. There's a significant increase in characters with darker skin and a lesbian. There's some talk of mental illness and abusive love, but mostly there's just Grimm and Isla, same as before. The things that make it so I can say NIGHTBANE is an improvement all feel like punch-ups than the author genuinely trying hard in the face of overwhelming criticism. I'll admit it's an impossible job to follow up a book as reviled as Lightlark, and Aster had a very uphill battle. The prose is at least notably better, but that doesn't mean the book is. I think a lot of people honestly forget, weird as it sounds, that writing a book is not one skill, but a series of skills. It isn't just raw text, the prose, that counts. Dialogue is a skill. Plotting is a skill. World building is a skill, and so on. Most authors have strengths and weaknesses, and a book can be defeated or saved by any factor, being particularly good or bad. NIGHTBANE still is not a good book, and it is hard for me to see it as better. It's the same in another way, a slight change, but not enough for me to believe it's genuine progress. For that, I think I'd have to see any self-awareness of her weaknesses. But there isn't. So this one comes out, this one goes out to the real lightheads, my larkers, my larkheads, all of you freaks out there, because I want to talk about the broader lore around curses and power in this world, and it's going to be nearly incomprehensible, and require me to bust out old Lightlark again, which I did not enjoy. It's very difficult to piece together the lore of this world, despite the relative lack of it. Most lore is delivered in paragraph-long explanations and nothing else. It's like 1 to 2 paragraphs, that's it. And a lot of it just fails to add together. I want to both untangle it and understand it, as if that wasn't a futile effort. And the best place to start with all this is the Nexus Curse. And I'm just going to run through a lot of smaller sections of plot holes or just things I need to address as the sun sets. Nexus was introduced in NIGHTBANE, but serves as one of the key sets of rules that defined the entire world. Let's head straight to the source. It's Marin and the Khaki Rebellion. We all have been historically tied to the rulers' lives because of the power they alone channel. Do you know why, Isla? She shook her head. Because thousands of years ago, the king's ancestors had a nightshade create a series of curses called Nexus, designed to keep the people weak. Everyone, except for his line, was cursed to only be born with a single ability, and people were cursed to be tied to their rulers, so power could never be overthrown. Nexus was meant to keep us all weak, subservient, loyal. Nexus? She had never heard of it. How do you know any of this? History was buried. It took centuries for our group to finally gather this information. It started during the curses. You 6 were the stars of the Centennial, but we regular islanders also worked to break them. We learned that it used to be possible for a person to denounce their power and leave the realm. We believed if we could figure out how they did it, we could give up our powers and not be bound to the curses. We failed to figure out how to properly denounce our realms, but after you broke the curses, we realized you could be the answer to all our problems. You could break the current system of rule. 305 to 306. Marin continues to explain that they believe Isla is immune to curses as a flare, and that her being ruler of Wildling and Starling, she has inadvertently freed 2 realms from being tied to her life. That's the exact phrasing. Marin then goes on to say their ultimate plan is for Isla to kill Oro so she may break the Nexus Curse for all the realms. I briefly had to touch on this in my lore overview, and here's the full context. A bunch of stuff in this, however, is wrong to how we have previously established the world's functions. By the sounds of it, a Sunling King got a nightshade to make the Nexus Curse, which made it impossible for people to disavow their realm at all. It also made it so people could only have 1 elemental power type, even if they had a dual heritage. It sounds like it is also why, when a ruler dies, their people die, as a way to prevent the people from ever dreaming of overthrowing their ruler. As far as I can tell, this arrangement of the lore is the only way it makes sense, but I have to mention certain other implied facts. For example, it seems that before the Nexus Curse, ancient creatures and the Winterland Viking people, briefly mentioned, were all able to disavow their realm many thousands of years ago. To be realmless is to be powerless, but also not connected to the health of your ruler. It meant, too, they were immune to the curses, the Centennial curses. Since the Nexus Curse, it is impossible for you to renounce your ties to your realm. This sounds like it makes sense, but it doesn't. For one, it implies the people were already tied to their realms and rulers before the Nexus Curse. The Nexus Curse just maybe introduced the death side effect to revolution. If people were already so tied to their realms and rulers that disavowing them would fully remove your magic, then clearly the link between rulers and realms was always there and powerful. The Nexus seems way less important because it was already somewhat in place. The people of Lightlark never had a choice. Overall, though, like I say, I like the divine right of kings being subverted by a curse. The renouncing thing just doesn't match up what we were told. Now on to breaking the Nexus Curse. Marin asserts the Revolution believes Isla has accidentally broken the Nexus Curse twice now. I sure would like to know the reasoning for that. The idea is that Isla is the link between the Nexus Curse and her people, sort of like the link on a chain or a filter which Nexus must fall through. It really, really helps to make sense of Lightlark's power system if you think of it through fluid dynamics. Power trickles down from Isla to her people, and she affects what power looks like, it seems. The Revolution believes that Isla is curse immune, and this means the Nexus Curse doesn't apply to her, and thus doesn't apply to her people either. There's no proof of this, and I have to say the only way this lore works is if we assume Marin is just stupid and wrong here. The Nexus Curse has two effects. If a ruler dies, their people die, and people can only have one set of power. We can't test the former, but we can test the latter. The new lands seem very segregated, but Lightlark itself is not, and there have to be a number of inter-realm romances and children who, if Nexus was over for them thanks to Isla's filter power, should have sudden access to new realm powers. It'd be extremely notable if this happened, and it isn't mentioned, so it didn't happen. The Nexus Curse is still active on Isla, and Marin is just wrong, I guess. What we can believe logically, at least, is that Oro has to die. The curse is woven to his bloodline, and he is probably the focal point. If Isla took his powers entirely, it'd include his origin powers, which would include the hub of the Nexus Curse, which then might break it. It really depends on how you view the curse, though. Is it a curse that properly, purely lives in the hub of Oro? Or is Oro just the curse filter trickling it down to his people? In the latter case, that has more world-breaking implications. After all, if Isla's curse-breaking flare can affect everyone below her on the power hierarchy, the wildlings would have been immune to curses the moment she was born. Same with Grimm and his curse-immune necklace, maybe. So it must be that the curse lives and functions solely through Oro, despite what we're told. The other realms' links to Oro and Nexus are unsaid and also mysterious. The Nexus Curse was put on Oro's family line, but all realms are subject to its effects. Did every ruler at the time ask to be included in the Nexus? Was it a group decision? Was it sprung on them as a surprise? Like they arrived at Lightlark and the Sunling King was like, guess what? I guess this is how it works now, and everyone just shrugged. I suppose it again implies a trickle-down power-nomic system, where Oro is above the other realms, and so the curse on him is passed to lesser rulers who aren't Oro, and then passed to the people. And it starts to look eerily like a pyramid scheme at this point. I don't know what that implies, I just know Isla isn't a stopgap here for the flow of curses. The Nexus Curse also changes a bunch of stuff about how we understand Book 1. For one, are love bonds immune to the Nexus Curse? By the rules we get in that one sentence, they shouldn't be. But Oro and Isla are able to use other realms' powers through their love bond. But then Oro and Isla are two who are immune to the Nexus. We have no idea how it shakes out. If you're dating a Skyling, can you now fly? The Nexus Curse says no. Oro and Isla are dating each other and can use each other's powers. No idea, because they're also special. Aurora and the Nexus Curse. So many Nexus Curse parts. Aurora was immune to the Centennial Curse because she formed it, but she should have been subject to the Nexus still. She's able to steal all the realm's powers using the Bondmaker without issue, meaning Bondmaker is immune to Nexus. But Bondmaker is an entirely different can of worms. Night has come. Night is coming. I've adjusted my lighting slightly. This is good lighting, by the way. Everyone's gonna compliment me on these lighting. I'm gonna get an A in lighting. Bondmaker. Bondmaker is the giant needle from the first book. Here's the explanation from the plot twist corner of old, okay? Here's a quote from Lightlark. This is the Bondmaker, the only enchanted device that allows a transfer of ability, created to help Sunling Kings shift their powers to their heirs without having to die. Lightlark, page 330, that is Celeste/Aura speaking, Aurora. I've been capitalizing Bondmaker as an important term when I've been writing this out, but strictly speaking, it is lowercase, and it's an A, not a the. There are multiple Bondmakers, I guess, though Aurora couldn't find one in 500 years. Bondmaker is capable of defying the Nexus Curse, it seems, as Aurora can use it to briefly have all of the realms' power. Okay. It's also the only kind of magic item that allows a transfer of abilities, which is just a lie. Or, not a lie, a plot hole. In NIGHTBANE, Azul says, "There are other ways to have an heir beyond the obvious," Azul said. "It is possible for rulers to transfer power through a love bond or special relics. Like the Bondmaker," Isla thought. The cost is high, however. Permanently transferring ability shortens a ruler's life significantly. Page 29. Alright, so Bondmaker is a the now as of book 2. Also, it's no longer the only relic that can transfer power. The only way to explain stuff like this that doesn't rely on calling Aster a poor writer not bothering to keep track of her own lore is to just assume that Azul, Aurora, and everybody else is constantly incorrect about the things they say. It's the only way it makes sense. We understand power transfers and inheritance like this. A ruler has a big pool of power that lets them live forever. If they have an heir, it starts a power exchange over an unknown period of time where the last ruler ages as their child does, and eventually dies. The more children or grandchildren you have, the faster you wither away, as ruler power pool is depleted. You can also do an instant transfer. A love bond allows a ruler to send all of their power to someone else permanently or have it stolen. Azul also implies that maybe you can have a platonic familiar bond with an adopted child and give them your power, but that's not confirmed. So, power transference. Have a child or use an item to speed up the process. Either ways, without power, you age and die. This seems to be only the case for rulers, but in NIGHTBANE, Isla actually notes this. A man whose flesh hung off his bones like the skins in the shop towered above her. He looked old, which meant he either had generations of children or had been alive more than a millennium. Page 163. And I honestly don't know what to do with this information, lads. The implication has always kind of been that the heir stuff really only applies to rulers, not everybody. And we're just going to ignore the idea that, like, random people are also living for 1,000 years or aging because they have children. We're just going to put that aside for now, okay? I have to point it out. Bondmaker, though. The cost of it is said to be blood, but that was probably a lie by Aurora, as when it's used it doesn't particularly drain Isla to the dregs. It has been used before, after all, by Sunling Kings to do... What? Because we already know the moment your baby is born, you start to die. You do. A Sunling King is not immune to this by default. Bondmaker allows for a clean transference of power instantly, but a new Sunling origin baby starts the transfer process the second it is born. Using Bondmaker would speed it up, but it shouldn't cancel the already ongoing death side effect. Perhaps all Sunling heirs have been adopted then and given heir status with the Bondmaker? But if the Bondmaker really works as we've been told, there should be a pretty long and obvious history of immortal Sunling Kings. They are immortal unless they have an heir. Bondmaker apparently removes that death effect. We should be drowning in Sunling Kings. Certainly everyone in the realm should notice something was up when the Sunlings were the only ones not dying whenever they had an heir. But I guess everyone just forgot, which everyone is constantly doing. The timeline of Lightlark is a mess, certainly many thousands of years long, and definitely not planned out ahead of time. The Centennial was 500 years ago, which is recent history to these immortal nations of immortal rulers, and nearly immortal people. Despite the meaningless nature of time to this world, pretty much everything has been forgotten. People forgot about the Bondmaker. People forgot you could revoke your realm loyalty, or that Nexus wasn't always in effect. It's only a few thousand years old. People forgot they came from a whole other world, what Drex were, that Lightlark itself was built on a giant portal. Characters conveniently discover these historical facts as the plot develops, but the world as a whole are just amnesiacs. It's frankly impossible for this much incredibly important, weird, world-changing lore to have been utterly forgotten and lost to time. Especially since history as we know it is very sparse beyond these huge revelations. What even happened 2,000 years ago but the status quo? Like, who is failing to write any of this static but drawn out history down? Like, nothing significant has happened for thousands of years, and yet everybody has forgotten these things, with rulers who, plausibly, could be thousands of years old. Next up, let's talk about love bonds a bit in the lore corner. So, love bonds and Isla, in fact. The history is a mess, but so is the present. Comparing the two books highlights how much lore feels tacked on top of, not like gently revealed. I don't think Aster planned any of this out ahead of time. She's only constructing it backwards from new ideas and people pointing out plot holes. Try to convince me that this isn't another direct response to people making fun of book one. Isla and Azul are speaking here. Your realm's curse was one of the better ones, he filled in. Not being able to fly for 500 years certainly must have been terrible for a society that clearly woven their power through the fabric of their day-to-day, but it wasn't nearly as bad as dying at 25 or eating hearts to survive. That didn't mean it wasn't deadly, though. Zool, the day it happened, we lost many of our people. They all just fell from the sky. Isla closed her eyes. The thought of them, without explanation, falling to their death. She clutched Azul's wrist harder. Flying comes naturally to us. Even those of the smallest shred of power can do it. Those who weren't skilled enough or quick enough to use wind to cushion their fall perished. Page 27. Ultimately, this isn't related to the subject at all. I just didn't want to fail to include the bit where Isla and Azul look to the reader and directly say, stop making fun of the fact that skylings only can't fly. They died, guys. It was really sad. Also, the cadence of they all just fell from the earth is exactly like that Reddit post about the guy whose dog herded a flock of sheep into the ocean. They all just disappeared into the sea. Lightlark and NIGHTBANE don't really care about consistency or logic, but I'm still here and I'm still kicking, even in the darkness. So, Isla and love bonds. Why does she need to learn to access power and steal power through her love bond this book, when in Lightlark it's established the entire goal her guardians had raised her for was to do exactly that with Oro? Isla was raised extremely specifically by Aurora and Aurora's plans to seduce Oro in order to steal his powers. In NIGHTBANE, a point is made that she has to learn what love bonds feel like and how to properly access them. She ought to know this already, right? It's similar to how Isla is portrayed in the Nightshade flashbacks as rather shy to sexuality. The girl was literally raised with seduction as her final purpose in life. She was supposed to die seducing a guy. Her final purpose in life, on an island full of naked, sexually free, wild people. In both cases, it feels like the book is trying to keep Isla very neutrally relatable, rather than consider how her backstory might impact her present. Power sharing and heirs and all of this world building is actually very important to, say, reading and potentially enjoying this book. These are not little mysteries I'm stuck on overall, but key aspects of how anything functions. I can't appropriately appreciate a twist or new lore if it just confuses me. A good fictional world will be such that you can imagine an event happening and predict how that event would happen in universe. And God, that's a really generic way of putting it, but a world should have an intrinsic logic to it that allows extrapolation. Rules should be predictable enough that you can have fun with loopholes or imagining what would happen if a certain event happened within the bounds of them. In Lightlark, literally anything could happen as a result of any action. There are no rules, and the points do not matter. The fundamental hole in the heart of all of Lightlark's lore is something that bugged me for a very long time, and I finally figured it out. Lightlark is both a world with extremely hard rule-based magic, while also being deeply lax and allegorical. These are two near opposite poles of how magic systems can function, and they don't function together, at least not like this. Magic in Lightlark is often very metaphorical. It's very fairy tale-esque. When you fall in love, you share so much of yourself, even your power is shared. And if you fall in love unwisely, that power can literally be used against you. The heavily symbolic role of being ruler is one that takes a literal turn when people truly rely on their king to live, and the life of the king is that of the people. There's even a Fisher King element to it, where rulers must inject their own power into the land, and when Lightlark physically suffers, Oro does as well. Things like the egg, sun, heart of Lightlark are similarly very symbolic fantasy. In NIGHTBANE, it's pointed out that Isla was shot in the heart last book and that it split in two, dividing her literally and metaphorically between Grim and Oro, light and dark. This sort of magic is what you see in fantasy realism, and it isn't meant to work on a scientific scale. It's far more about emotions and vibes. It's not my favorite system, but it's a thing. The issue is that the world is also, at the same time, extremely specific about its rules. The rules don't add up, but there are a lot of them. Everyone is under several layers of curses that dictate what they can and cannot do. The curses can be broken, but only under specific, fairly literal means. Rather than it just being that the king and the land are tied in a fancy metaphorical way, the king is literally tied to the land with an explicit curse that functions in a highly specific way. The metaphorical, flowing aspect of this sort of magic does not work when boxed up, and as poor as Lightlark is at creating effective rules, it still has them. A lot of the time, it has them. It wants to have both cakes, and at this point it just simply cannot. You cannot predict anything in this universe because any action might have consequences that are either symbolic or literal, and there's no way to tell which is going to happen. It's that which really makes it such a frustrating series to read and discuss at length. I've talked about it a lot with my flatmate and people on the Discord at this point, trying to remember plot holes, prove or disprove if they even are plot holes, and at every point it relies on me pulling up a paragraph of text and coming to several different conclusions. I've dealt with a lot of highly convoluted lore in my time, but Lightlark is uniquely fucked. At this point, I've talked a lot about Grim and Oro and romance, but there's still room for some asides. Like the magic not cursed movable necklace Grim gave Isla in Lightlark and how it's revealed to be a wedding ring equivalent in this book, which again, she can never take off. Going back to Lightlark, we can appreciate the scene it is first introduced in a different way. And also, we can kind of appreciate that the writing really was worse in Lightlark. It's not a joke. "I'm thinking," he said darkly. "Thinking what?" He reached for her, and blinked. His entire expression changed. The hand he had reached toward her now reached inside his pocket. "That I have something for you." He pulled out a necklace. It had a dark chain, holding a black diamond as large as a plum. Isla's eyebrows came together. He was giving her jewelry? She didn't know what to say. Her face was still hot. The diamond was beautiful, but she didn't want a gem. She wanted him, pressed against her, immediately. Grim grinned, sensing everything. He looked ready to take her into his arms once more, but seemed to think better of it because he turned his attention to the gift. "May I?" She nodded, hoping he didn't mistake her disappointment for not liking his present. She lifted her hair and he clasped the necklace into place, tight around her neck, his fingers lingering for just a moment. "I know you're more than capable of protecting yourself," he said, head bent low, breath against her nearly bare shoulder. "But should you ever need me, touch this, and I will come for you." Lightlark, pages 213 to 214. So there wasn't consent, is what I'm saying. He then turns the necklace invisible, and Isla is wearing it from then on. I can't think of a single defense for Grim giving Isla this necklace. He is more than capable of coming to Isla's aid from anywhere, as he constantly does. He definitely could create or offer another magic item to fulfill a similar role. Yet he gives the wife whose memories he removed a necklace which she can never remove, under false pretenses. During, again, the plot of Lightlark when he's meant to be seducing Isla so she can seduce Oro, Grim really just can't help himself, and reading any amount of Lightlark again for this video has been torturous. The scene is also the one of the weird hell portal thing, which on second read sounds like it might just be the ocean, but it also might be a portal. It's never clarified and never mentioned again, and I've been thinking about it a lot, so please tell me your hot takes about this paragraph. "They must have been at the base of the castle, underground maybe. Orbs holding white light crowded the corners of the room, floating like balloons. The walls were arched, held up by columns, and beyond them sat a slice of dark water like a piece of nighttime sky trapped below. It shimmered, startling her, and she took a step back." Page 212. I read this and processed it forever as them being underground in a dark basement and her seeing between two arches, just like one arch, I guess, a portal of darkness and stars, rather like how her star stick summons. Like, whenever she uses her star stick, she draws a circle on the ground and it fills with, like, black stars. This sounds like that, and I thought that for a long time. But it might literally just be the sea. But then also, why would Isla be startled so much? Like, why would it shimmer suddenly? So I think this is some sort of portal, but, like, is it? No, really, like, somebody please help me on this. If it is a portal, it seems like something we would have heard of by now. I certainly would have assumed it was the way back to the old world, if not for the fact that winds up being in Isla's Lightlark Palace for some reason. Anyway, this is the scene where Isla is given a necklace she doesn't want or understand by Grimm. It's later referred to as having a diamond be the size of the small potato, which cements its place in YA history forever. Grimm should not have done this. Grimm is not a very good person. But as I've said, I don't think that makes him a villain. I think he's just an anti-hero who is also extremely abusive to his wife. Grimm's broader plot actions are never wrong and truly seem to be for the greater good overall. He kidnaps Isla's people for their own good, and they love it. He tells Isla she'll love... Oh god, I've been speaking for so long. He kidnaps Isla's people for their own good, and they love it. He tells Isla she'll love him later, and she does. He wants to return to the previous world only for her, and doesn't want to kill innocents in the process. He just will if they resist him. But with Isla, that edgy but correct veneer just changes to just being a bad husband. He can't leave Isla alone during the centennial and blows it all. He removes her memories without discussing it or her consent. He gives her a marriage necklace when she has no way to consent at the time. He's never in any rush to explain anything to her, only that he knows best and she'll realize he was right. Eventually. If she just does what he wants and says. Grimm is bad. I do not like Grimm. I do not like this man. Even in their enemies to lovers flashback arc, Grimm is simply unpleasant. He's jealous and possessive of Isla immediately, even when he refuses to actually be with her and is actively planning to kill her. He's very sexually aggressive and constantly teasing Isla, only to reject her last second. Their bond is much less mutual interest and good feelings, and mostly him unloading his trauma while she drools over his abs. Grimm is meant to represent something to Isla, and that is a choice. It's the same with Oro and the principle of a lot of love triangles in theory. If you're going to have a plot where two people are in love with the same girl who then has to choose, the two potential endgame people will represent something to the lead. It's not subtle in NIGHTBANE, especially when multiple characters explicitly tell Isla she has to make a choice between Oro and Grimm, and that the choice will define all of history. Grimm is dark and Oro is light. Grimm saw Isla murder a bunch of innocent people by accident and still loves her, even though she thinks she's a monster for it. Oro hears of this and tells her she simply made a mistake and isn't one. Grimm loves her in spite of it. Oro tells her there is nothing to spite. Grimm is a villain who sees Isla as a villain too, while Oro sees Isla as a lovely girl he cares for deeply. Grimm is gonna win this one. On one hand, Grimm's storyline might be the more interesting one if it lived up to its premise. Like, Isla could have a full villain arc and rule next to Grimm as the Queen of Shadows in a plainly evil way. Maybe Isla could have reverse character development, fully commit war crimes and not mind because she chose darkness. I hate Grimm, but otherwise at least it's a direction, it's a choice, it's a commitment. On the other hand, Oro is the better love interest. He's a self-care king who does not even have sex with Isla while she's having an identity crisis because he knows it isn't healthy for her to ignore her problems in favor of a relationship they haven't defined yet. Oro is right that Isla accidentally overdoing it with her powers is not the same thing as being a monster. Oro is supportive and loving and reasonable and absolutely about to self-sacrifice himself next book and leave Isla all of his powers so she can endgame with her soulmate Grimm. NIGHTBANE it talks a lot about Isla being split between the boys, torn in half literally within her heart. But there is no choice. The first half of the book is heavy on Oro, but it's grim all the way down. Remember Oro's Of Mice and Men beach Oro's, oral sex scene? He ain't making it, and even he seems aware of it. Isla is picking grim. And Isla picking grim, the inevitability of it, and how NIGHTBANE doesn't even pretend anything else could happen, means Isla isn't really picking grim. She's not choosing his side. His argument that she is a monster like him, that she belongs to the dark, she's merely just destined by the narrative for grim. She has no agency in this because the book doesn't present it at all like it's a choice. It's so obvious. I was frankly extremely surprised Oro lived this long. It's interesting, in a better, series, I might note how the ending of Lightlark and NIGHTBANE are the same, but Isla's choice differs. In one, she picks Oro, and Grim is sad, but kind of accepting of it. In the second, she picks Grim, and Oro is sad, but kind of accepting of it. In a better world, Book 3 will end with Isla picking both Grim and Oro, and them both being accepting of it. It'd also fulfill a role as being both life and death, day and night at the same time. But I highly doubt that's where we're going, especially with the Nexus Curse being introduced. Oro ain't living. And if, since I'm long enough in here now, and, I gotta do my obligatory book rec in the middle of this review, if you want to read a series where, the above kind of better ending does happen, I'll just suggest The Black Witch Chronicles by Lorianne Forrest. High fantasy with complicated rules and weird magic that still just actually works out. It's extremely romance-heavy YA that even a romance disliker like myself actually enjoys. Increasing diversity and social awareness as a huge cast of characters team up to fight magic fascism. There's sexy dragon shapeshifters, which I understand are huge now, and the love triangle legitimately resolves with the love triangle kind of accepting their accidental three-way dragging marriage of immense power. Good stuff. It's really not perfect. When the last book comes out, I'm going to do an extremely long video on the Black Witch Chronicles, which only I will care about, but it's miles above Lightlark is what I'm saying, and if you're kind of into the potential of Lightlark, if you're one of those people, I'd suggest you check out the Black Witch Chronicles. You probably legitimately would like them. This section's called Side Characters, and does NIGHTBANE have side characters? Sort of. Last time I ran through the other rulers individually, and at this point there's not much use in that. We know who these clowns are, and we also know they don't really matter. Azul is here until he isn't. Cleo is a mysterious threat until she simply turns up and explains her motivations to Isla. Marin serves the plot, and Oro's friends serve nothing. It's only a slight stretch to call the entire supporting cast extra to everything else. In Lightlark it was less so, but in NIGHTBANE, between the rushed present and the long grim-centric past, it's true. Isla, Oro, and Grim are the only characters who feel they have an independent agenda and interest from the plot. Enya arranges the wildling economy and has a backstory, but does she change ever? Does she react or grow or do anything but be a named face in the crowd? It's the same with Cleo or Azul. As much as they both technically do a couple things, they also never feel like people. They're almost here out of obligation. Yet when we turn our gaze to the lead trio, the same problem haunts things. In Lightlark, I called Oro the only character who actually really had an arc, and in this one, I guess it's Isla. Oro begins the book confused but in love with Isla, and ends it less confused but more in love. Grim begins the book off on an island in love with Isla, and ends it on a different island in love with Isla. Isla has an arc about getting over her depression. She changes her mind about Grim as she regains her memories. She thinks she's a bad ruler and seems to vaguely think she's an okay ruler by the end. Girl is going through things at least. Are they what I would call well-written arcs? Do they feel natural? Are they given enough time to develop in an interesting or realistic manner? No, obviously, but they do happen. Isla this book is less of an over-the-top Mary Sue, and because of that there's a lot less to say about her. She's still riding giant jungle cats into battle with her perfect mastery of life and death, but it's not as dramatic as Lightlark. On one hand, better writing. On the other hand, rather boring. I don't even know what to say about Isla at this point, or what personality traits I would even pin on her. Impulsive and naive and emotionally immature, I guess. NIGHTBANE tries to acknowledge Isla more as flawed, but it is also afraid to show her as too weak. As much as she doesn't know how to rule, people who call her out on it are considered assholes. As much as she is impulsive and dramatic, Oro is prepared to babysit her until she calms down. She blames herself for a lot of things during her depression arc, and it's great she learns to like herself, but she never really improves any of her actual flaws in the process. It's like Isla's flaws are things only she is allowed to fully perceive. Most people around her see her as a near-perfect, just entity, especially her love interests. So when Isla is made to confront the fact that she may have flaws during her depression arc, the crux is not overcoming her flaws, but seeing herself as Oro does, as just kind of perfect, no real work needed. I like the notion of Isla's depression arc and flaw realization, I just don't think it works. Seductive Haunts. I forgot about Seductive Haunts the first time I wrote this review. Somehow, even though it's the most key thing in this review, maybe. I think I've said it like 3 times. So when NIGHTBANE was first announced, I did like a little 1 a.m. video reading the summary and discussing it and the cover, which, by the way, talking about the cover, do you remember how there was a weird, it's actually up here somewhere. There's this skull thing, and the skull is comically small compared to the crown. That weird baby skull is on the spine, so I guess they were pretty proud of it. Anyways, I talked a little bit about it, and let's talk about the blurb now at the near end of this video. Here's the real blurb, it's on the inside flap. Isla Crown has secured the love of 2 powerful rulers and broken the curses that plague the 6 realms for centuries, but few know the true origins of her powers. Now, in the wake of a crushing betrayal, Isla finds herself hungry for distractions, preferring to frequent Lightlark's seductive haunts, instead of embracing her duties as the newly crowned leader of 2 separate realms. Worse, her fellow rulers haven't ceded victory quietly, and there are others in Isla's midst who don't believe her ascent to power was earned. As certain death races towards Lightlark and secrets from the past begin to unravel, Isla must weigh her responsibility to her people against the whims of the most dangerous traitor of all, her heart. So I discussed in Lightlark, actually, right off the bat, how the summary wasn't accurate, and NIGHTBANE is much the same. Do people care about the origins of her powers? Absolutely not. Every scene with it revealed is skipped over, and no one reacts with any particular emotion. Is Isla hungry for distraction? Yes, she tries to bone Oro multiple times instead of train. But does she frequent Lightlark's seductive haunts? No, she does not. One of my predictions was excitement for dumb nightclubs, and NIGHTBANE heard my pleas and turned away from my anguish. There are no haunts to be had here, seductive or unsexy. Isla does not frequent anything on Lightlark but the fields where Oro trains her. Obviously, we can also discuss the rest, the other rulers have ceded victory quietly, actually, and the people who don't think her ascent to power was earned don't matter. Certain death is grim racing towards Lightlark, I guess, but Isla isn't weighing responsibility at all, just her libido. So it's all pretty wrong, obviously. But the seductive haunts thing. What happened? Where did they go? The blurb is the official one. This is the one on the dust jackets. It's on the websites. It references something which is simply not in the book in any capacity. You can squint and pretend the rest are, but these haunts? These seductions? Missing. Now, authors don't write blurbs for big books like this generally, but they do get to weigh in and approve them. They're going to see them before they're published. And a bunch of other people familiar with the book also get to approve them. Everybody looked at the lack of seductive haunts and just nodded. It's a failure of the industry. It's a disgrace. This girl should be at the club. I was promised what sounded like a stupid, out-of-the-place fantasy clubbing, and it makes sense it got cut, but why leave it in the blurb like that? Why let your sin shine so brightly, so exposed? Your lies so blatant that they cut. Why isn't she at the club? I want her to be at the club. So, I very, very, very keenly do not follow social media around Lightlark, and I have no interest in that. I'm not downloading TikTok, dear God. The media hype around it is quite over to my knowledge, though I know that the author certainly has been around promoting it. Lightlark was a viral smash, but it wasn't good, and I suspect the sales figures will reflect the fact that a lot of people have entirely lost interest in it in the last year, fans and haters included. The fact that there will be a third, then, is a fun twist on matters. Rarely do viral meme materials demand so much money and time and last so long after their true relevance. Will anybody buy book 3? Will book 3 be called, like, Duskflower Dawnheart? I'm taking bets. Is book 3 even the last? I sure hope so. I had to buy NIGHTBANE for this, which I plainly didn't for Lightlark, let me assure you. I was eager to, and successfully read it the day it came out in one sitting in a cafe, menacingly. Though it's taken me, like, way longer to work on this review, obviously. It's a pain referencing a physical book, and at this point, I think my receipt is I think it's expired. I won't even be able to get my money back. But anyways, when I was buying NIGHTBANE, I was accidentally the first person in the store. And I found out Fourth Wing 2 was released the same day. Now, Fourth Wing is a much more recent booktop phenomenon, to a greater degree because its hype has been far less impacted by critique. I've seen plenty of people saying that's bad, seen plenty of people saying it's good or just mediocre. It's dragon smut. The sequel came out faster than Lightlark's did, though, and certainly every other person on opening day of, this book releasing was there to buy Fourth Wing 2. I am, in many ways, a life support system for this series right now, especially as I fully intend to suffer through the rest of it. We feed each other, Aster and I, a symbiotic pair. But without videos like mine, how well do you think Lightlark would have stuck in the internet's collective memory if we didn't all make extremely long videos dunking on it? I feel like book 3 will be almost a Divergent movie scenario, where it'll be more contract than fan demand that brings the finished product to us. And similarly, it may be cut off entirely without being completed. NIGHTBANE is setting up a much larger world than Lightlark, with much higher magic. I think it's probably going to go full fae, as so many books do, and at that point it's very easy to imagine Aster going true Sarah J. Maas and wanting more sequels set in the same universe. I just don't believe we'll see anything past the third book, and I don't think the third book is going to be peaking too high on the bestseller list. NIGHTBANE came out around slot 6, with 22,000 books sold, a far cry from Lightlark's debut. We don't have access to a lot more information about publishing and sales, because it's all just a very closed industry in that regard. So, this section is where I search for a why, but unlike Lightlark, there isn't one. Lightlark had a whole story behind it, TikTok and algorithms and just undeserved fame and success. NIGHTBANE has none of that, and it's still here on my doorstep like an unwanted mouse. I don't want this. You don't want this. Who wants this? Yet it's here, and it will continue. It'll just continue. Why not? And what am I supposed to do about it? In many ways, that was just my conclusion, but here we are, I still have more. NIGHTBANE is not a very good book. I think I've said that a lot. And sorry if this shocks you at this point, but Lightlark was not a very good book either. It has not gotten better, and I don't trust the author to nail it on the third try. What Lightlark is, I guess, winds up being a pretty good look at the modern publishing industry as it stands right now. Marketing books has always been a nightmare, and books are a nightmare. What sells? For a very long time, YA was merely an age group. A bit before 2010, YA started to be seen more as a genre, with the rise of series like Hunger Games and Divergent and Twilight. The industry rushed to imitate what worked because it made money. Most books don't make a lot of money. Publishing is extremely expensive up and down the chain, and it's not just authors who don't earn very much cash. A successful book, however, pays for all the less successful books. A key author like Stephen King will nearly single-handedly be keeping a publisher afloat. Cashing in on trends is an attempt to squeeze money from a very tough stone. Paranormal romance faded into dystopia, which faded into dark fantasy. Social media began to grow and grow in the 2010s, and suddenly that was what determined what people read. Things like BookTube, Bookstagram, BookBlur, Book whatever. Word of mouth has always been far more influential on readers than advertising campaigns, and trends started to be more dictated by social media. And independent indie books as well. Amazon made it incredibly easy for people to publish and distribute their work, especially things with far more adult content that would have typically been passed in for traditional publishing. Works like 50 Shades of Grey, originally very small press published, helped illustrate a niche but mainstream publishing just wasn't fulfilling yet. So they started doing it. The mid-2010s had a big focus on fae and royalty, a theme which is still persisting in the YA fantasy space quite heavily. The content of these books is increasingly adult, with ever older lead characters. The rise of TikTok and book talk helped cement why. Everyone is just extremely horny all the time, I guess. I'm asexual, I don't, but apparently. Because every book talk trend is based on spice and explicit sex that really doesn't fly under the YA radar, but is often lumped into it because it's a more approachable niche than adult fantasy. And here we get Lightlark. It promises things based on trends. It appeals to the thirsty TikTok masses. It calls to aesthetics, and most importantly, it is a shiny new thing. The internet and publishing both love this, shiny new things that might make money. Lightlark is far more YA than some books often promoted on Book Talk are. You know, the ones that say it's YA but they have full explicit sex. But it still sits right here at the edge of my, rough timeline as the true culmination of it all. Hype and spice and the hope to catch a trend before it forms so publishing can make some money off of it. And now we have NIGHTBANE. It's not a shiny new thing now. Lightlark did not revolutionize the market, nor has it left its mark. If anything, it's taught publishers to be a little more cautious about assuming an upcoming title will be the next big thing. But publishers will keep blowing cash on books like Lightlark anyway. They have to, because when it pays off, it is worth it. NIGHTBANE, though, is adjacent to all this talk of markets and trends. NIGHTBANE is a sequel, and it is here. It merely exists and sits, and we all have to scratch our heads of what to do about it. It is not new, it does not reinvent a book no one particularly liked. It exists. It's here. It has about as much depth as Lorem Ipsum, but it exists, doesn't it? We all just have to accept that and try to figure out what that means together. Oh gosh. Okay, so that's been a number of hours of filming, and I would wrap it on my very dramatic note, but I figure while I have you here and my laptop is screaming so loud it might be caught in the recording, I would probably again just quickly say thank you, everybody. The first Lightlark video is what started I should look at the camera for this, but as people often notice, I don't look at it. It's because I'm reading like 23,000 words of text for one, and for another, I don't like eye contact much. But no, thank you so much. My voice is entirely broken from speaking from 6 hours. I'm about to go and play D&D for 3 more hours. I appreciate it so much. Lightlark really, I legitimately made that video because it was longer than my text reviews normally are. And I figured if I put it in a video form, I could share it with friends who didn't want to read 23,000 words of text. That was most of the inspiration for doing it. Since then, my channel has come much farther along, and it's been really fun, honestly. It's been very, very weird. I did not intend for any of this, but this is my hobby, this is what I like doing, and it's been fun going on. I'm excited for this video to be out so I can take it easy for a bit, because this has been a lot of work, so many hours of work, and I'm just pleased that I'm finally done. I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't, I think I did this last time, mention the fact that I myself am an author. When it comes to talking about my own books, I'm never like, hey, I'm so much more of a better killer author than this person. Because, again, reading a book and reviewing a book is a different skill to writing a book. I'm not trying to go and say I'm the world's best author, but I am trying to say I have some books. I happen to think they're pretty fun books. They're mostly about angels and demons, because that is what I like. And if you're interested in LGBT representation and angels and demons, I would really suggest you check it out. I have links in the description. My main series or duology that I have is called Good Angel and Bad End. Good Angel, Bad End. They have these quite lovely hardcovers. Spins them around merrily. I worked very hard on these. These are self-published books, and I've done my darnest to make them honestly quite nice on the inside. And I feel always really self-conscious about promoting it, but I figure I might as well, honestly, because I will say, I'm really remiss to do this normally. I think I'm a better author than Alex Aster. I normally hate to do that either. I think I might be at least a little bit out of the trash pile there, so I just wanted to talk about it. Good Angel is the story of an angel who is newly created. She winds up going to basically an angelic finishing school situation, because I wanted to have fun and do a magic university, but her tendency to be a good angel, to want to be kind to everybody, winds up snowballing into something that might just end the world. She befriends a demon, and everything might come crashing down. Good Angel is very much about identity, discovering identity through a non-human character, and having fun with angel and demon lore and just that sort of stuff in general, which is my favorite thing to obsess about. It has a lot of casual LGBT rep, as I've said before, which isn't everything, but if you're looking for something really high on that front, it's especially aro, ace, aromantic, asexual, questioning kinds of nature. And it has a sequel, which is a full duology, full story. They work really well together, I like to think. Good Angel is sort of a coming of age for one angel. Bad End is sort of a coming of age for the entire world, as the apocalypse still is coming and things will absolutely never be the same again. These are YA-ish books. I wouldn't strictly call them that. It definitely, age rating wise, I would say 15 plus. But if it sounds at all interesting, I would look more on like Amazon or Goodreads or whatever. Check it out. I also have a different book also about angels. It's called Angel Radio. Angel Radio is about the end of the world and angels again, because I am autistic and have a very specific special subject. Angel Radio is about a girl who is left mysteriously alive when horrific angels descend from the sky and kill absolutely everybody. The angels seem to have some sort of goal or motivation, but do not communicate everything. They just kill everything, and she is left alive and alone until one day she catches a radio signal from another survivor and sets out on a trek through Vermont as she tries to find some answers at last. It's another kind of weird one. This one is definitely more YA. It's YA with a light horror surrealism kind of fun. And anyways, I feel like I ought to go ahead and mention that now. Thank you so much again. Cheers. Oh gosh, my throat hurts. And it's night. NIGHTBANE.